FBI detective, this video is purely for entertainment and does not infringe on copyrights or laws. The rights to the novel and image belong to the original author. We do not claim ownership. Don't like waiting and want to listen to this fanfic in full now? Subscribe to our Patreon, where you'll find the best fanfics. Chapter 176, Exploding Helicopter. The community where Kyan Basie lives is located at the junction of Queens and Long Island in New York, and is located on the outskirts of the wealthy area. The transportation is well developed, there are many areas covered with vegetation, and there are many cameras. Now this large area is full of flashing red and blue lights, and the sirens are noisy. At many intersections outside the area, the NYPD has implemented mandatory traffic control. Many drivers looked at this rare scene in front of them with curiosity. After learning from various channels that someone used a rocket launcher, they all felt that they had entered the real version of GTA. I just don't know how many stars the NYPD gave the other party. The big newspapers have money and can fly helicopters from the sky to the scene to live broadcast the pursuit of the murderer. The reporters from the tabloids wanted to drive into the blockade, but the NYPD tonight was very dedicated and refused to let them in. In desperation, these reporters had to turn their cameras to those cold-looking troop carriers with black spray paint and the word SWAT sprayed on the sides, which drove into the blockade from all directions. Dear agents, in the office area of investigation team number 5, Augustus stood at the front, watching the live broadcast on TV, feeling extremely anxious. He turned around and said loudly, "The major media in New York are going crazy now. They want answers, but we don't have them. William, what's the situation with Roan and Reed now?" Reed was injured and has been sent to the hospital. Roan is chasing the enemy. Damn it. Augustus cursed in a low voice and ordered hurriedly, "Does Roan have any support? Let the nearest SWAT team go and meet up with him quickly. Also, where is the enemy now? Have you found him?" William and other technicians typed quickly on the keyboard with 10 fingers. Hearing Augustus' question, he hurriedly replied, "The nearest SWAT team is expected to meet up with Roan in 5 minutes. Mona has found the enemy's traces, and she is now helping Roan locate and hunt down the enemy." Good. Rushing to William, Mona had already remotely linked the screen of her computer to the computer of investigation team number 5. Augustus looked at the screen on the computer, his arms folded across his chest, his forehead full of nervous sweat. At the same time, the black SUV was like lightning, moving fast on the road. Turn left at the intersection ahead, go 300 meters ahead, and turn right. In the driver's seat, Luo An's eyes flashed coldly, and the sound of Mona typing on the keyboard and the sound of the steering remote control kept coming from the communicator beside his ear. After Luo An left Kyan Basie's house, he called Mona and explained the situation here. Upon hearing this, Mona immediately handed the steering wheel to Lassie and asked Lassie to drive to the scene to support Luo An. She sat in the co-pilot seat and quickly typed on the keyboard. Through the camera on the road, she remotely controlled Luo An to chase the grey pickup truck at the fastest speed. Looking at Mona typing on the keyboard on the co-pilot seat, even the shadows of her 10 fingers appeared. Lassie, who was driving, swallowed silently. In the blockade area, following Mona's instructions, Roan drove the SUV across a passerby's backyard, smashed an empty doghouse and fence, and soon found the shadow of a grey pickup truck on another road. Augustus in the distance. At this moment, a long orange flame suddenly emerged from the grey pickup truck and shot into the sky. Boom. A deafening explosion sounded, and the TV station helicopter in the sky was hit and fell to the ground in a spin. Fouquet. Shit. Several law enforcement camps and TV station personnel saw the scene on TV and cursed. "Oh my god. Jesus." The audience in front of the TV covered their mouths and exclaimed when they saw this scene. "Roan, be careful. Brake quickly." Mona, Augustus, William and others in the distance shouted Roan's name through the surveillance on the road. Because the direction of the helicopter crash was on the road where Roan's SUV was going. "It's okay." Luo An frowned slightly and silently pulled the communicator beside his ear outward a little. Mona's scream was so loud that her eardrums were almost shattered. Looking at the helicopter gradually falling towards him, Luo An's face sank, and he silently stepped on the accelerator to the bottom. The next second, at the moment, when the helicopter's blades were spinning and landing, Luo An turned the gear lever, controlled the brakes, and suddenly twisted the steering wheel. The sub went around the helicopter at an incredible angle. Boom. The helicopter fell to the ground completely and exploded on the road, and the dark sub rushed forward again like lightning in the bright background of the fire. Seeing this scene, everyone in the number 5 investigation team in the distance slammed their desks and shouted loudly, "Nice. Cool. Awesome." As expected of Roan, I knew he could do it. Unlike the other agents, Mona's throat suddenly became dry when she saw this scene, and she shouted loudly into the communicator, "Roan, are you crazy? Are you going to die? I won't do it next time." Because of the helicopter's obstruction just now, the shadow of the grey pickup truck disappeared again. After casually replying to Mona, Roan hurriedly asked, "Mona, where is the enemy now?" Under Lass's surprised eyes, Mona slammed the door next to the co-pilot. %. After muttering a few words, Mona tapped the keyboard again, and then replied coldly, "Turn right at the intersection 500 meters ahead. A team of SWAT and NYPD are there, and they will soon meet and engage in a firefight with the grey pickup truck." Okay. Just as Mona finished speaking in the communicator beside her ear, flames and fierce gunshots were heard not far to the right front. Seeing this, Luo An immediately turned the steering wheel and rushed in that direction. When he arrived, an overturned police car was burning on the side of the road, and 2 NYPD officers were lying on the ground, obviously seriously injured. No one in the SWAT team next to him was injured, but there were some bullet holes on the vehicle. He stepped on the brakes and parked the SUV on the side of the road. Luo An then found that there was a forest on the right side of here, and there were 2 deep car tracks on the ground turning into the forest. He ran to the SWAT and took the M401 assault rifle handed over by the other party and asked in a deep voice, "What's the situation now?" "There are 4 people on the other side with long guns. One of them used a rocket launcher when he saw us, and 2 NYPD patrolmen were unfortunately killed." Before the SWAT team members could answer, a gloomy NYPD suddenly came over. Luo An realized that the other party was Detective Walton, whom he had just met this morning. Nodding to Roan, Detective Walton opened the trunk of his police car, took out 2 rifles from it, and put them on his back, turned around and stared at Roan and said, "Their car was just driven into the woods next to them by the SWAT team." Okay. Nodding, showing the photo of Georgian land right to everyone, and confirming that he was one of the 4 people in the grey pickup truck and the guy driving, Roan immediately took the communicator handed over by SWAT. Without any nonsense, Roan shouted loudly into the communicator, "All units, pay attention, check your equipment immediately, and surround this woods in teams. If you encounter non-law enforcement personnel, you are allowed to shoot them on the spot. Understood?" 4 teams of fully armed SWAT members and a dozen NYPD armed with rifles all slowly entered the target area. Taking a deep breath, Roan took the helmet handed over by the SWAT team, put it on, turned on the night vision goggles, and picked up the rifle. Together with Detective Walton, who was eager for revenge, the 2 formed a temporary team and walked into the woods together. Chapter 177 Double Murder and Successful Arrest of Georgian Landry. Roan, Detective Walton, and several SWAT team members found the grey pickup truck not long after they left. The grey pickup truck crashed into a tree, with a deep dent in the front and the windshield shattered all over the ground. Walton walked slowly to the grey pickup truck in a vigilant posture, and found that there was no one inside, and immediately cursed in a low voice. Roan on the other side carefully searched the interior of the grey pickup truck, and then his face was very ugly, because he did not find the launch tube of the rocket launcher inside. "Attention, all units." Roan took out the communicator from his pocket and said with a serious face, "The enemy has a rocket launcher, be careful." "Got it." Hearing Roan's words, every member of the search team in the woods changed their expressions, became more focused, and the atmosphere became more tense. The detective walked past the grey pickup truck and continued to walk forward a few steps. Suddenly, he found that Roan had not caught up. He hurriedly turned around and whispered, "What's wrong, Roan? What did you find?" Roan looked at the grey pickup truck, then looked at the ground around him. After a long silence, he suddenly looked up and asked, "Walton, are you familiar with this forest? Is there a river or a path in it?" Walton's home was not far from here. He heard Roan's words, thought about it, and replied in a low voice, "There is indeed a river due north of here, and it finally flows into the Long Island Sound." After listening to Walton's narration, Roan frowned and took out the communicator again. "Attention all units. The enemy is likely to flee to the river due north. The search and arrest teams in the nearby areas should pay more attention and be careful. Understood." After receiving the affirmative reply from the SWAT team members, Roan put away the communicator, picked up the rifle, and ran quickly to the due north. Seeing this, Walton hurriedly raised his rifle to catch up, but he was very confused about why Roan made such a judgment. Hearing Walton's question, Roan, who was walking quickly, raised his eyebrows. One reason was that he had just found some broken branches and crushed leaves, and their path was exactly in the north direction. The second reason was that the gray pickup truck was in a wrong state after hitting the tree. Judging from the traces on the ground, the gray pickup truck was very fast. A car hit a tree at that speed, and it was impossible for the driver and passengers to be uninjured. But there was no blood in the car. The only explanation was that the 4 people jumped out of the car before the collision. But after the 4 people jumped out of the car, they packed up their things and left here at a very fast speed and rushed straight to the north. So it is very likely that they were prepared in advance. After listening to Roan's narration, Detective Walton behind Roan was full of disbelief. He was about to say a few words of rebuttal and questioning when the sound of rifle fire suddenly came from not far ahead. "Quick, let's go over to support." The moment the gunshot rang out, Roan stomped on the ground fiercely, and his figure instantly disappeared in front of Detective Walton. Detective Walton gasped, not only shocked by Roan's speed, but also the direction of the gunshot, which was the north. Seeing that Detective Walton did not catch up with him in time, Roan's eyes turned, and he immediately opened the system and took out a bottle of Swift potion and poured it into his mouth. The other party had a rocket launcher in his hand, and Roan did not want to be blown up everywhere. In the next few seconds after Swift potion entered his body, Roan's already amazing speed was further improved. Walton could still see Roan's back in front of him, but he just blinked, and Roan completely disappeared from his sight. Fouquet, are FBI agents so perverted now? Shuttled through the woods at a very fast speed, Roan soon arrived at the location where SWAT was exchanging fire with the other party. Bang bang bang. Because of the low terrain, the 3 SWATs were suppressed by the enemy's firepower at this time. However, SWAT was not without gain. They had killed a long-haired white man in the 4-man team. The long-haired white man was now placed in front of a white man with thick eyebrows as a cover, allowing the SWAT bullets to hit the body. Nodding to the 3 SWAT members, Luo An measured the distance between the 2 sides and immediately took out the remaining 4 stun grenades from his pocket. At the same time, another white man with a big beard took out a rocket launcher from his back, stood up on the spot, opened his mouth and laughed. "Trash, be purified by the flames. Praise Jesus, let us meet again on the Sabbath." Bang, bang. Before he could pull the trigger, 2 dazzling white lights and explosions suddenly exploded in front of the big beard and the thick eyebrows. Seeing this, the 3 SWAT members hurriedly stood up and fired back. And Luo An had already moved to the enemy's side at a very fast speed in the next second after the stun grenade exploded. Damn, the big beard's eyes were hurt by the white light, and he cursed, and hurriedly prepared to pull the trigger again. At this moment, he suddenly felt the saber in his pocket being pulled out, and at the same time, a man's voice without emotion suddenly rang in his ear. "You really deserve to die." Cold sweat instantly soaked the back of the bearded man, and the expression on the face of the thick-browed man was as if he had seen a ghost. Bang, 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 bang. 6 gunshots, 2 shots in the chest, and 1 in the head. The bearded man and the thick-browed man collapsed to the ground with limp limbs. The 2 did not understand how the man who killed them moved to their side until they lost consciousness. At the moment the 2 bodies fell to the ground, the feeling of discomfort all over the body, and as if the bottom was on fire appeared again. Roan did not hesitate, and immediately fell under the bearded man. Puff, puff. 2 bullets hit the ground beside Roan, and the mud splashed on Roan's face. Georgian land dry. Only 1 person was left in the group of 4. When the 3 SWAT members rushed here and shot to cover Roan, Roan was like an angry beast, running quickly towards the direction of the shooting. At this time, the 3 SWAT members finally saw Roan's speed, and their eyes were dull, and they doubted their lives. Bang, bang, bang. Pistol bullets were fired from behind the mound not far away, but they either landed in front of Roan's figure, or on the side. Only one of them left a scratch on Roan's calf. Fouquet. On the mountain, Georgian Landry's eyes were full of shock and fear, seeing that Roan was getting closer and closer to him, and the bullets in his pistol were empty. He hurriedly stood up and prepared to run to the river below the slope. The 3 people just blocked the SWAT, just to give him time to clean up the kayak. Now the 3 people are dead, and Landry has no intention of burying them with him. Just as Landry stood up, a white flash suddenly flashed his eyes. Puff. The next second, the pistol fell to the ground, and a sharp pain came from his right wrist. Landry looked down with a painful face, and it turned out that the bearded man's saber was firmly inserted into his wrist. Ah. Bang. As soon as Landry's scream came out of his mouth, Roan suddenly knocked him to the ground with a knee strike. This case is so big, the main culprit Landry must not die now. But being alive does not mean that he can go to prison in good health. Using a rocket launcher to blow up the NYPD and the FBI, this kind of thing has not happened in New York for a long time. Landry rolled down the slope to the riverside. Roan walked to his side and directly removed his left and right arms with clever strength. Tell me. Bending down and looking at Landry's face, Roan touched the scar on his left eye and showed a bright smile on his face. Who are you? Chapter 178. Post-event gains and the truth of the case. In the dark night, Roan bent over and squatted by the river, looking at Georgian Landry in front of him with a smile. Tell me, do you know? Who are you really? Hearing the question from the ghost-like man in front of him, Landry, with a saber in his right hand, instantly blushed and opened his mouth to greet Roan's family. Boom. Before he could make a sound, Roan, who saw 3 SWAT team members rushing down, stood up and kicked him unconscious. Agent Roan, are you okay? The SWAT team members rushed to the river with rifles. After confirming that Landry had fainted, they asked Roan with great concern whether he was injured. The 3 were shocked by Roan's agile skills and terrifying speed of action, and at the same time, they felt a little ashamed that they had not provided help before. I'm fine. Roan smiled and patted his arm to show that he was not injured. Hearing the ashamed words of the 3, Roan waved his hand. The 3 of them were the first to discover the enemy and successfully killed one of them. There was no need for this. After handing Landry, who was lying on the ground, to the 3 men, Roan climbed up the hill again. At this time, Detective Walton finally arrived here. Looking at the 3 bodies on the ground and hearing about Roan's performance from the SWAT team, Walton's first reaction was that the SWAT team was bragging in front of him, or NYPD. But thinking about Roan's terrifying running speed just now, and the SWAT team patting their chests to ensure that they were not lying, Detective Walton's breathing suddenly became much faster, and his eyes looking at Roan were full of disbelief. If Roan was not an FBI, Walton would have contacted his superiors and found a way to get Roan into their NYPD. Roan didn't know that another guy had the idea of recruiting him. He took out the communicator and told the search team in this area that the enemy had been solved. Then he took out the communicator and pressed the dial button. At this time point, the various law enforcement teams did not have the real-time monitoring equipment installed on the law enforcement officers. Since entering the woods, Roan has turned off the communicator, and the number 5 investigation team has lost contact with Roan. At this time, everyone in the number 5 investigation team was worried, and Augustus's forehead was covered with sweat. Lassie, who arrived at the outskirts of the woods, clenched her fists, and Mona bit her lips tightly, all staring at the woods in front of them. Outside, there was a group of reporters who seemed to be crazy for the headlines, and inside, there was Roan who could not be contacted, and could only wait for news. Augustus couldn't sit still at all. His sweaty hands unconsciously clenched the folder, and paced back and forth in the front of the number 5 investigation team's office area. Augustus was not worried about the reporters. What he feared most in his heart was that Roan would have an accident. Beep beep. In the extremely quiet room, the sound of the communicator suddenly sounded, which scared everyone. Augustus, who woke up, prayed to God that Roan would not be in trouble, and hurriedly asked William to press the button. Mona and Lassie in the distance also hurriedly pressed the answer button. 3 people were shot dead, and I successfully captured George and Landry alive. Roan took off his helmet, stood there and stretched, and said to the communicator with a smile, the mission was successfully completed, and no one in the search team was injured. Hearing Roan's iconic voice coming from the communicator, everyone in the number 5 investigation team cheered. Yeah. Great. Well done. Augustus laughed, threw the folder aside, asked William to inform Roan to have a good rest tomorrow, and not to go to work, and then strode out of the number 5 investigation team. There was still a group of hungry reporters waiting for him outside. Lassie and Mona also breathed a sigh of relief when they heard the voice, and their clenched fists slowly loosened. Roan, you can actually capture this guy Landry alive. It's amazing. When Roan came out of the woods, Lassie was full of smiles, patted Roan's shoulders vigorously, and gave him a thumbs up. Mona, who was standing next to him, held the computer and glared at Roan with a stern face. Without saying anything, she and Lassie took George and Landry to the hospital with the ambulance. After a busy day, Master Roan Greenwood drove back to his small apartment in Greenwich Village, Manhattan, which had been completely renovated for an extra fee. He slept until noon the next day. He got up and went to the bathroom to solve his internal conflicts. Roan opened the system page in his mind while taking a shower. To his surprise, the evaluation given by the system yesterday was not excellent, but very excellent. Since obtaining this simple system, this was the first time Roan received this evaluation. He turned the system page and opened the system treasure box that he was too tired to open last night. A familiar and rough cutscene. In Roan's surprised eyes, the treasure box actually opened 5 bottles of potions. So, if you get a passing rating, the treasure chest will open 2 bottles of potions. Good is 3 bottles, excellent is 4 bottles, and very excellent is 5 bottles. Luo An had a better understanding of the operating logic of the system, and he began to check the names of the potions that came out of the treasure chest. 1 physical potion, 1 strength potion, 1 hemostatic potion, 1 feather fall potion, 1 analgesic potion. Seeing the physical potion, Luo An took it out of the system without saying a word, raised his head, and drank it all. His spirit was instantly full, and his waist was instantly strong. At this time, Luo An's system warehouse page had 2 bottles of detoxification potions, 2 bottles of hemostatic potions, 2 bottles of strength potions, 2 bottles of feather fall potions, 1 bottle of weakness potion, 1 bottle of aqua surge potion, 1 bottle of fire resistance potion, and 1 bottle of analgesic potion. Analgesic potion is another new potion. Although the system still has no explanation, Luo An can guess what its function is just by looking at the name. Finally, he got 2 bottles of feather fall potion. In order to know its specific ability, Luo An closed the curtains in the living room, raised his head, and drank it all. The moment he drank feather fall potion, Luo An felt as if he had escaped from a small part of the Earth's gravity. Under this feeling, Luo An jumped on the spot, and then found that one of the effects of the potion was to slow down his falling speed, and the other was to make him jump higher. The only problem was that he needed to clean up the lamps on the floor of the living room that he had smashed. With Augustus' words before, Luo An did not go to work all day on Tuesday, but watched TV series and movies at home plus lying dead. On Wednesday morning, Luo An walked into the number 5 investigation team with 2 bags of Mona's favorite breakfast. Then he was surprised to find that the desks of the agents of the number 5 investigation team were all replaced with new computers, and the old chairs were also replaced with new chairs. A new coffee machine was also replaced. Wow. Sitting down on the new chair at his workstation, Luo An twisted his butt, patted the new computer, and a happy smile appeared on his face. Now when I watch movies, when I have nothing to do, the computer should not freeze. At this time, Mona also came in. Seeing this, Luo An immediately handed her breakfast with a smile. After receiving the breakfast, Mona rolled her eyes at Luo An, and the little resentment in her heart slowly dissipated. The two chatted briefly for a while, and Luo An asked, "How is it? Did that guy George and Landry confess?" Chapter 179, Post-event gains and the truth of the case. No. Mona shook her head. Yesterday, the doctor in the hospital pulled out the knife from Landry's hand and simply treated Landry's two arms that were removed. Mona and Lassie took him back to the number 5 investigation team. But no matter how they interrogated him, Georgian Landry said nothing and didn't even ask for a lawyer. In desperation, they had to let the trace examination department test Landry's DNA first and compare it with the DNA of the head in the refrigerator, trying to find out the relationship between them. But the test results have not come out yet. Luo An frowned when he heard this. But we are not completely without gains. Mona turned around, handed a few pieces of information to Luo An, and smiled. We found the information of Landry's 3 accomplices. According to the information, the 3 of them are the remaining members of the Davidian sect. Hearing the words from Mona's mouth, Luo An suddenly remembered the words "Praise Jesus, let us meet again on the Sabbath" shouted by the bearded man before his death. The Davidians are a branch of the Seventh-day Adventist Church and a well-known extremist sect in the federal government. Their doctrine believes that the kingdom of heaven is coming, and the end of the world is a bloody battle with pagans. They will sacrifice themselves in this holy war and ascend to heaven. This group of people preach terror and violence, fight non-cultists, build manors and bunkers, and stockpile weapons and food. In 1993, the Davidians created a tragedy that shocked the federal government, setting fire to the manor and self-immolating all of them, including 21 children under the age of 16. In 1995, the Davidians created a huge explosion in the federal government building in Oklahoma City, the capital of Oklahoma, killing more than 200 people, or burying them in the rubble. After that, the FBI took great efforts to arrest the main leaders of the sect and put them in prison. It can be said that among the numerous cult organizations in the federal government, the Davidians have always been at the top in terms of hands-on ability. This also explains why the 3 bearded men dared to use rocket launchers to blow up the helicopters of the NYPD and the TV station. The remaining cultists have no idea of fearing law enforcement officers. Okay. After reading the information, Luo An threw it aside. When almost everyone in the 5th investigation team arrived, he and Mona interrogated Landry again. Facing Luo An, the guy who threw a knife and stabbed him, Landry's face was full of anger. But he still didn't say a word. After 2 hours of tossing and turning, Luo An and Mona got up helplessly and left the interrogation room. In addition to taking action directly, the two used all kinds of rhetoric. Seeing that Luo An also walked out of the interrogation room empty-handed, the faces of the detectives in the 5th investigation team suddenly fell. Lassie held her chin with her hand, looked at Luo An and asked tentatively, "The surveillance video in the interrogation room is broken again." Hearing this, Luo An's mouth twitched immediately. Rejecting Lassie's suggestion of physical interrogation, Roan sat in a chair and pondered for a long time and suddenly clapped his hands. Someone must know the identity of Georgian Landry. She also has a high probability of knowing, while Landry killed Judge Carolina and the other 5 people. Lassie, Mona, William and others all became alert and asked hurriedly, "Who is it?" Georgian Landry's home. Because Landry was arrested, the nanny no longer came here, and the paralyzed mother in bed did not continue to take medicine, so she woke up from sleep. Roan and Mona contacted her to help her with personal hygiene, and then put her in a wheelchair. Knowing the purpose of the 2 people's visit, Mother Hallie trembled and drank a sip of water. Time passed by, Hallie sighed, and slowly told the story of decades ago. Hallie did not go to college when she was young. After graduating from high school, she worked in a supermarket to make money and met her boyfriend Reed Thompson. After the two got to know each other in depth several times, Hallie suddenly realized that Reed was actually an addict. Hallie originally planned to leave Reed, but was deceived by Reed's sweet talk. Not only did she not leave him, but she agreed to go to the south with him to make money. Not long after, Hallie, who had not taken any quarantine measures, became pregnant with Reed's child and then gave birth to him in Mexico. From then on, the two began to take their children to study together. If you often walk by the river, you will get your shoes wet. During a study, the two were discovered by border control personnel. Hallie successfully escaped, while Reed and the child were lost during the escape. Hallie had had enough of this kind of fearful life, so she finally chose to give up looking for Eden the child and came to New York alone. In New York, she started again in the supermarket. A year later, she successfully married the supermarket manager and gave birth to her second child, naming him Georgian Landry. A few years later, Landry did not get into college, but chose to join the army and became a naval scout. Later, Hallie's husband died of a sudden illness. In order to take care of his mother, Landry chose to retire from the army and return home. At this time, the nightmare came to her again. One night, Hallie was having dinner with Landry when several men suddenly broke into her home and killed Landry on the spot. The leading man told Hallie not to be afraid and that he would not kill her because his name was Gary Thompson. He was the child that Hallie had abandoned. According to Gary Thompson, his father had told him, since he was a child, that it was Hallie who deliberately left clues and provoked the border patrol, which forced him and his father to flee. In the end, they were caught by the Davidians just after they got out of the wolf's den. It was also at that time that Gary Thompson met people like Big Beard and Thick Eyebrows, who were also children captured by the Davidians. Later, the Davidians were destroyed by the FBI. Gary thought that the nightmare was over, but he did not expect that his father Reagan was arrested and imprisoned and sentenced to life imprisonment. Although Reagan had absorbed and sold books, killed people under the instructions of the Davidians, raped people, and made bombs. But Gary knew that his father Reagan was a good man, so he began to contact lawyers and tried every means to get his father out of prison. During this process, Gary accidentally found a photo of Hallie in his father's belongings. Although the upper level of the Davidian sect was destroyed, there are still many branches left in the lower level. With the help of these remaining members of the Davidian sect, Gary successfully found the current address of his mother Hallie, and also found Georgian Landry, who was completely different from him in terms of living conditions. The flame of jealousy burned in Gary's chest. Under the urge of anger, Gary killed Landry and cut off his head and then underwent plastic surgery to make his appearance look like Landry. In this way, he could escape the pursuit of the FBI and live as Georgian Landry and take care of Hallie for him. The way to take care of his mother Hallie is to make her disabled, claim that she has mental problems, feed her medicine, and let her sleep. Hallie did not tell the truth at the time, but how could Gary believe it? Last week, the elderly Reagan died in prison. In order to get revenge, Gary began to look for helpers and buy guns, and began to eliminate the lawyers and several others who were dawdling in his eyes. In Gary's eyes, if they hadn't been careless, his father would have been out of prison long ago. After dealing with those people, Gary turned his attention to the female judge, Carolina Belozzi, who opposed his and his father's appeal. As for the killing of female prison guard Kimora Kara and NYPD police officer Bokayan Basie, it was related to another matter. Note, the original case came from the United States Federal Court Case Query System, public access to court electronic R. The author found it through scientific internet access and made some appropriate adaptations to it. The original case was to ****, and the author felt that this book might not exist without the adaptation. Chapter 180, Post-Event Gains and the Truth of the Case. The reason why Gary Thompson wanted to kill the female prison guard Kimora and NYPD's thousands was because of a woman named Brill. Brill is the sister of Big Beard. She grew up with Gary and also came from the branch Davidian sect. A few months ago, Brill was arrested and imprisoned. Because the charges were not serious, she was released from prison not long ago. But not long after she came out, she was shot dead on the spot by the NYPD for attacking others with a gun in a public place and sent to the morgue. The NYPD who sent Brill on the road was thousands, and he also received the administrative leave mentioned above. The female prison guard Kimora Kara was the female prison guard who often abused her when Brill was in prison. No one knows whether there is really any abuse, but Big Beard chooses to believe his sister unconditionally. Hearing Gary asking for his help, Big Beard immediately nodded and agreed. In exchange, after the bearded man helped Gary kill the judge, the lawyer and others, Gary also had to help the bearded man kill Kyan Basie and the female prison guard. Roan took out his cell phone and helped old Hallie contact the service organization in this community. After Mona and old Hallie had a brief chat, the two got up and left the house together. Sitting in the passenger seat, Mona hugged her laptop inside. Roan, I feel that this story can be made into a movie. Reading, revenge, killing, cults, gunfights, hatred between two generations. There are too many elements. Maybe turning the steering wheel and driving the sub back to the direction of the Jacob Federal Building. Roan didn't have too many thoughts about this story. There will always be more torture stories in the world. Seeing Luo An's lack of interest, Mona curled her lips and muttered a few words, then suddenly remembered something and asked excitedly, Luo An, do you think, if I adapt this case into a script and submit it to Hollywood, will there be a chance to sell it to those large film and television companies at a high price? What? Are you serious? Seeing the golden light in Mona's eyes, Luo An's mouth twitched, and he hurriedly said, don't forget the FBI's case confidentiality regulations. I know. Mona rubbed her face and muttered, just talking casually. Mona was a little short of money recently, so she started to think about it. After carefully looking at Mona for a few times and confirming that she was really just joking, Luo An slowly breathed a sigh of relief. Mona had been warned many times by Augustus for often using computers to invade other places to cause trouble. But these are trivial matters. Mona's skills are all on the computer, and Augustus is just knocking her. Office area of investigation team number 5. With the confession of old Hallie, Mona and Lassie took George and Landry to the trace examination department for identification. Identification was just to show more evidence in court. Facing Gary Thompson, a cultist plus murderer plus prisoner who used a rocket launcher to blow up the NYPD and FBI, the judge's sentence on him was almost full of buffs. Of course, the subsequent work of collecting evidence, writing reports, contacting judges, etc. in this case, had nothing to do with Luo An. He was now sitting at his workstation, fiddling with the new computer. Originally, Mr. Warren sent 10 laptops to the number 5 investigation team shortly after the previous missing female billionaire case. But the laptop belonging to Luo An was snatched away by Mona as soon as it was received. So the current scene in the office area of the number 5 investigation team is that Lassie, William and others each have a new desktop computer and a new laptop. Luo An only has one new desktop computer. In front of Mona was a new desktop computer and 2 new laptops. Watching Mona's 10 fingers flying and typing on the keyboards of 3 computers, Luo An was speechless. Aren't her fingers tired? And why is Lassie next to her swallowing her saliva again? At this moment, Augustus, who had been missing for a long time, pushed open the door of the number 5 investigation team again and walked in, shouting, Luo An, come to my office. Okay, sir. Luo An immediately stood up and strode into the team leader's office. I don't know what reward this case can bring me. Sit down. Throwing the folder in his hand into Luo An's arms, Augustus sat down on the old chair. The reason why it is an old chair, not a new chair like the other agents, is related to Luo An. Because the night before yesterday, when chasing the grey pickup truck, Luo An accidentally drove his car and smashed the fence and dog kennel of a passerby. He casually promised Augustus that he would change in the future and would never do it next time. Luo An lowered his head and opened the folder in his hand. As expected by Luo An, the document contained a certificate for bonuses for all members of Investigation Team 5 and a doubling of Luo An's own bonus. The usual bonus is $1,500, which doubles to $3,000. It is equivalent to a senior agent's monthly salary. Not only that, the $200,000 reward offered by the Long Island government in the Seaside Deep Pit serial murder case will also be deposited into Luo An's account before the end of get off work today. Looking at the figure of $203,000, Luo An immediately grinned, raised his head with a smile, and shouted loudly, "Thank you, sir. You're welcome." Augustus waved his hand. He just hoped that Luo An would destroy less things on the next mission. When he first came to Investigation Team 5, Luo An only used some stun grenades, which was not a big deal, and was within Augustus's tolerance. But the fence and doghouse last night, Augustus took a sip of the new coffee on the table and felt relieved. Luo An had just promised him that he would be careful in the future. With his usual steady performance, this kind of thing should not happen again in the future, right? Swallowing the coffee in his mouth, Augustus took out another folder and handed it to Luo An. "This is the reward for the two cultists you shot and killed the night before yesterday." Luo An was slightly stunned. Seeing this, Augustus smiled and explained, "Those two guys have committed many crimes in recent years, but because they have always been helped by the remnants of the Davidian sect, and their status is too low, a certain FBI department did not investigate them carefully, so they have been able to move until now. This money is the reward of a certain FBI department. The team leader of that department thought that the money would be taken by their own people, but he didn't expect that it would be taken by you. The reward for each member of the bearded trio is $30,000. Because one of them was shot and killed by the 3 SWAT team members, Luo An can only get $60,000. But $60,000 is not a small amount. Adding the $203,000 just now, Luo An calculated that he had made a total of $263,000 for solving this case. Luo An's eyes sparkled. If he could make this much money for every case he solved, plus the Apple stock he bought before. Let's set a small goal first, to make $100 million before the age of 35. Seeing the golden dollar sign in Luo An's eyes, Augustus' mouth twitched. After chatting with Luo An for a while, he waved his hand and let him leave. As soon as he left the team leader's office and walked to the front of the office area, Mona and Lassie cast questioning eyes at Luo An. Chapter 181 Visiting Verines. Mona and Lassie mainly wanted to know about the bonus after the case was solved. Same as before. Luo An threw a folder into their hands and laughed loudly. "Everyone can get a bonus this week." Pa 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 pa. Hearing Luo An's words, the office area of investigation team 5 suddenly exploded. The detectives applauded Luo An and cheered loudly. "Oh, thank Luo An. Luo An, you are the most handsome in investigation team 5. No, Luo An is the most handsome in the whole building." Hearing the increasingly disgusting words behind everyone, Luo An hurriedly waved his hands and hugged his arms to pretend to shiver. The detectives laughed. After playing with the detectives for a while, Luo An sat in his new chair and thought about it. Anyway, he had nothing to do, so he drove away from investigation team 5 and went to the hospital where Verines was. Verines was his superior after all. Now she was injured and hospitalized. Things like feelings still need to be kept in touch frequently. As usual, he bought some fruits and flowers. Dung. Come in. "Good afternoon, sir." Entering the ward, Luo An found that, although Verines was still lying in bed, her mental state was much better than before. Putting fruits and flowers on the table next to the bed, Luo An smiled. "It seems that the sir has recovered well." "Yeah." Verines still spoke briefly, and the two chatted briefly. As Luo An expected, Verines still asked about the female judge shot case. For Verines, the team leader, there was nothing to hide about the case. So Luo An described in detail his experience of solving the case, as well as the story and hidden secrets behind the case. Listening to Luo An's narration, Verines' pale face showed a slight smile. But when she heard that Luo An had killed 2 enemies alone and captured Gary Thompson alive, she suddenly coughed. Luo An saw this and hurriedly poured her a glass of water. "Thank you." After slowly drinking a sip of water, Verines calmed down her mood. After a long silence, she suddenly said, "Luo An, just the morning before yesterday, I got a message that someone wants to parachute a deputy team leader into your number 5 investigation team." Hearing this, Luo An paused slightly in pouring water. But he was not panicked, because there must be something else. Seeing this, Verines looked at Luo An with satisfaction in her eyes. This is why she likes Luo An. Not only can he solve cases, he has a good brain and strong skills, but he also knows everything about office politics. For Verines, the last point is more important than anything else. She used to be in the center of the Federation, that is, Washington, and she had seen too many outstanding talents in certain aspects, but in the end, they disappeared inexplicably because of politics. The other party is a chief of the counterterrorism department of the Homeland Security Department of our FBI New York branch. Verines' body has not yet fully recovered, and she speaks a little slowly and is a little out of breath. So after she said a few words, Luo An motioned for her to drink some water and take a break before continuing. According to Verinus, after the chief of the counter-terrorism department learned that the detection rate of the cases of the 5th investigation team had been steadily increasing, he submitted an application to the special agent in charge, Corbett. He wanted to transfer an old team member of their department to the 5th investigation team as deputy team leader. But he was unsuccessful. Corbett threw the application directly into the trash can. When Luo An heard the name of Corbett, he grinned. But this incident reminded me. At this point, Verinus tilted her head, stared at Luo An, and said in a deep voice, "If nothing unexpected happens, the cases solved by the 5th investigation team will only increase under your leadership in the future. And the position of deputy team leader, which has not yet been filled, will target more and more people." Luo An's eyes moved when he heard this. As expected, Verinus then said, "The position of deputy team leader is still at the level of senior agent, so you are also eligible to compete. In terms of the internal level of the FBI, the level above the senior agent is the supervisory special agent, and August, the head of the 5th investigation team, is at this level. Even if he is the deputy team leader of the 5th investigation team, his level is still a senior agent. However, after the position is changed to deputy team leader, the salary will increase from about $3,000 per month to about $4,000. Hearing this, Luo An's eyes suddenly lit up. Then Luo An thought of something and raised his eyebrows. "But, sir, I was just promoted to senior agent not long ago. The position of deputy team leader." Hearing Luo An's words, Verinus's face did not change, and she said in a calm voice, "Because of the previous bombing, Corbett's transfer to Washington may be advanced." Hearing this, Luo An suddenly realized that it was no wonder that Corbett threw the application into the trash can. Returning a favor is nothing more than this. After Corbett was promoted to Washington, Verinus was most likely to take over his position. By that time, Verinus would have made her first move, and Roan would naturally have the opportunity to become the deputy head of the 5th investigation team. Verinus had two main purposes for telling Roan this news. One of them was that the specific course of action described by Roan scared Verinus a little. She hadn't heard of enemies who dared to use rocket launchers to bomb the NYPD and FBI for a long time. Verinus didn't want Roan to continue to work so hard when he continued to catch criminals in the future. Life safety was the most important thing. The second reason was that Verinus wanted to warn Roan to pay more attention to details in the future case handling process and try not to leave any handle for those who were jealous of Roan. Back to the 5th investigation team, Roan continued to fiddle with the new computer for an afternoon and then left work on time. On Thursday and Friday, the 5th investigation team did not receive any new cases. The detectives were dealing with the follow-up work of the murder of the female judge in front of the bakery and the serial murder case in the deep pit at the seaside. On Friday, Mona used 3 packets of breakfast in exchange for Roan to find Augustus and ask the Financial Crime Investigation Department how long it would take to deal with the murderer of the Park River male corpse case, Salvatore Cristo. After all, if the case is not handled, the reward will not be received. Mona is poor recently. Hearing Roan's question, Augustus only replied, "Don't worry." Hearing Roan's answer, Mona lay on the table speechless. "What's your recent situation?" Seeing Mona, who was not feeling well, Roan immediately became interested, leaned over to her, and asked with a low smile, "Is your credit card maximumed out?" "No." Mona shook her head and then nodded, "But it will be soon." Mona didn't say the specific content, but when she heard the words such as discount, price reduction, clothes, bags, and cosmetics, Roan understood. Then Roan glared at Lassie, blaming her for leading Mona astray. Lassie. On Saturday, Roan wore a helmet and went fishing with Agent Norton. On Sunday, he stayed at home and watched movies all day. On Monday, he came to the 5th investigation team and saw Augustus walked in with a serious face holding documents. Roan sighed. As expected, there was a new case. Chapter 182, Chief Financial Officer Kidnapping Case. Good morning, hard-working agents. Augustus pushed open the door of the number 5 investigation team and shouted at the top of his voice, "Unfortunately, another case happened in New York this morning, and we have work to do again." Rhea took the materials that William distributed to everyone, swallowed his breakfast, and muttered, "Damn it, can't these criminals in New York be quiet for a day?" Hearing this, Luo An took the materials and glanced at Rhea. "It is more reliable to hope that there will be no cases in New York, a feng shui treasure land, than to hope that there will be world peace." Looking down at the materials, what caught my eye was a very beautiful middle-aged white woman's headshot. The person in the photo is the victim of this case. Tris Perez, 41 years old, is the chief financial officer of a well-known cosmetics company in New York. After distributing the materials and receiving instructions from Augustus, William introduced the case to everyone. This morning, Tris Perez was kidnapped 100 meters south of her apartment when she was leaving for work. The caller was a woman who got up early to walk her dog. According to her, the kidnapper was a white man in a suit and tie who looked like someone who worked on Wall Street. The caller described the crime in a simple way. The man followed Tris, and when Tris walked to a black car, the man took out a pistol from nowhere, put it against Tris' head, and covered her mouth to prevent her from making a sound. Then the man opened the trunk of the car, stuffed Tris in, and drove away. According to the caller, excluding the process of following, the man took less than 3 seconds to act, and the dog she raised had not finished peeing when the man drove away. After listening to William's description, everyone in the number 5 investigation team had different expressions. Sure enough, kidnapping only requires the most ordinary behavior. The information shows that the person who called the police did not see the license plate of the car clearly, but only saw it driving eastward. Augustus discussed the materials with the detectives for a few sentences, then turned to Roan and asked, "Roan, what do you think about what to do next?" Hearing Augustus' words, Roan raised his head and said, "The information shows that Tris's parents died a few years ago, and she currently lives alone, so Mona and I will go to her house to look for clues. Tris is a chief financial officer, which is why this case was handed over to us. Ryder and Lassie can go to the cosmetics company and ask their boss. In addition, we also need to check the surveillance in the crime scene area and find the car. William and others can be responsible for these." "Great." Augustus nodded with satisfaction, clapped his hands vigorously, and loudly signaled everyone to follow Roan's arrangements in the next case handling process. "Finally," he added, "our most important goal now is to find Tris as soon as possible and confirm whether she is dead or alive. The first person to find specific clues will be rewarded with a big hamburger. Now, everyone act." Hearing about the hamburger, the detectives immediately threw a pair of sanitary bowls to Augustus, but they still acted quickly. Roan and his 3 companions walked into the equipment warehouse, sorted out their equipment, and drove to substitute directions. There's Perez's apartment. Roan looked around and asked 2 NYPD patrolmen to help visit Tess's neighbors. Perhaps they could get something. With the search warrant and the help of the trace examination department, Roan and Mona successfully entered the apartment. "Wow, she is worthy of being the chief financial officer of a cosmetics company." Mona sighed as she stepped into the living room, because she saw all kinds of lipsticks, facial masks, facial cleansers and a lot of skincare products. This is just the living room. There are more in the bedroom and bathroom. The only place without cosmetics is the study in the apartment. The desk in the study only has computers, keyboards and other items. But the bookshelf opposite the desk is filled with information and books related to federal taxes. Walking into the study, Roan picked up a book about federal tax law and flipped through it, then turned back to the agents from the Trace Inspection Division and said, "Take away all the electronic devices here and carefully check the bedroom and bathroom to see if there are any third-party fingerprints or DNA." "No problem." The agents from the Trace Inspection Division began to get busy. Roan turned and walked back to the living room and found Mona wearing gloves, looking at several cosmetics with a serious face. "What's wrong, Mona?" Roan raised his eyebrows. "Did she find a clue?" Mona turned around and said in a low voice, "Roan, I just checked carefully. Add up the prices of all the cosmetics in this apartment. They are probably more expensive than the small apartment I bought." "Mona, who has been poor recently, has a face full of envy and jealousy. Okay. Hearing this, Roan's mouth twitched. But this is actually an important clue, Roan. Seeing the speechless expression on Roan's face, Mona rolled her eyes. She felt as if she was misunderstood by Roan. Picking up the cosmetics set on the table in the living room, Mona said with a serious face, "This set of things is worth $800 but Tris just put them in the living room and didn't use them." Hearing the price of cosmetics mentioned by Mona, Roan subconsciously cursed the cosmetics company and lamented that women are the species in the world who are most willing to spend money on themselves. But then, Roan immediately understood what Mona meant and raised his eyebrows. This shows that Tris doesn't care about these cosmetics at all, even if they are very expensive. Or, Tris doesn't care about the person who gave her these cosmetics. Yeah. Roan took out his mobile phone and planned to call Lassie to ask her to investigate who always gave Tris cosmetics. At this moment, there was a sudden noise at the door of the apartment. Roan took Mona to the door of the apartment and found that the other party was a beautifully dressed white woman. The other party was one of Tris's neighbors found by the NYPD during the visit just now. After a simple look at the other party, Roan signaled the NYPD to let her in. HMPH. The white woman snorted at the NYPD with her nose raised and strode in with a bag. "Just call me Lawissa." After introducing her name, Lawissa's eyes lit up when she saw Roan's face. But seeing the trace examination agents busy in the room, Lawissa hurriedly asked, "What's going on? Where is Tris? Where is she now?" Roan turned his head and gave Mona a look. Mona nodded calmly, walked aside and began to check Lawissa's information. The two of them have become more and more tacit. "I'm sorry." Roan took off his gloves and replied, "Tris was kidnapped at gunpoint this morning. The NYPD did not tell her this." When he said this, Roan stared at Lawissa's facial expression. Upon learning the news of Tris's kidnapping, Lawissa was shocked, but there was nothing wrong with her. "Oh my god." Lawissa covered her mouth and exclaimed, "I was with her last night. We had a few drinks. It was because she was very upset and kept crying last night that I came here now." Tris was very upset. Luo An immediately grasped the point and asked seriously, "What happened exactly?" If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 183. The car was damaged within 10 minutes of purchase. I just collapsed. Perhaps because she was frightened, Lawissa's hands were shaking a little, and her voice was not as proud as before. She explained to Luo An carefully, "This came to my house after work yesterday with 2 bottles of wine. As she drank, she started crying, saying that she was under too much pressure. Her life was too crazy. She wanted to die, but didn't dare to die, and a lot of other things." His words were very messy. She talked about whatever came to her mind, but she didn't say much, so I didn't understand much, so I had to keep comforting her. Hearing Lawissa's words, Luo An narrowed his eyes and keenly grasped a few key points. Mona, who was standing by, came over at this time and gave Luo An an okay gesture. "Thank you, Lawissa. Your words are very helpful to us." Roan nodded calmly, took Lawissa to the side and sat down, and continued to ask, "Do you know anything about Tris's private life? Does she go to nightclubs? Does she smoke flower? Does she have a boyfriend?" Roan asked a lot of questions, and Lawissa shook her head again and again. "I don't know if Tris has a boyfriend. She never told me about these things. But I know that she never does the things you just said. She is busy working every day, like a robot." After asking for a while, Roan finally handed Lawissa to Mona and asked her to write down everything Lawissa just said. He walked aside and called Lassie. The call was quickly connected. "I'm Lassie." Roan asked directly, "What's going on at Tris company?" "Nothing." Tris colleagues were shocked to hear that she was kidnapped. Lassie, who took the coffee bought by Riad and nodded to express her gratitude, said downstairs at the cosmetics company, according to Tris colleagues, Tris' personal financial situation is very good, and she has no debts. She is a little strict when it comes to work, but she is very kind in daily life. I haven't heard that she has offended anyone. What about the boss of the cosmetics company? What does he say? Looking down at the cosmetics in the apartment, Roan was a little suspicious of the boss above Tris. It's not him, it's her. Lassie corrected the word error in Roan's words, and then said that the boss of the cosmetics company was a white woman in her 50s, almost 60. Okay. Roan's face rose. It seemed that he had guessed wrong. But this is also good news. At least it ruled out a wrong idea. After thinking for a few seconds, Roan continued to ask, what about Tris's love life? Did you ask about it? Of course I asked. How could I, Lassie, forget about this? Hearing this, Lassie raised her head and laughed, saying, the boss of the cosmetics company once told me and Ryder that Tris broke up with her boyfriend a month ago. But Tris didn't look very sad. She really has a boyfriend. Roan raised his eyebrows. Is her boyfriend sad about the breakup? I don't know. The boss of the cosmetics company didn't know, so Lassie certainly didn't know. Sorry. Roan slapped his head. He ignored this point and then asked, what's the name of Tris's boyfriend? Lassie asked about this. His name is Lolpost. He's an architect. Very good. Roan's eyes lit up, and he immediately asked Lassie and Ryder to go and talk to this ex-boyfriend right now. After hanging up the phone, Roan saw that the agents of the trace examination department had almost finished cleaning up, and just as he was about to turn around and walk towards Mona, the phone in his pocket suddenly rang. After pressing the answer button, William's voice came from the other end of the phone. We found the car. The murderer dumped the car in an abandoned factory in Brooklyn. The dark SUV was speeding on the road. Mona sat in the passenger seat and explained by typing on the keyboard with both hands. The owner of the car is an 18-year-old white youth named Quantal Walster, who has no criminal record. According to William's investigation, Quantal was in school at the time of the crime and had no time to commit the crime. Quantal did not report the loss. Luo An nodded and continued. In other words, the car was stolen by the murderer recently. Yeah. Mona was slightly stunned and then looked at Luo An with admiration. She could never keep up with this reaction speed. Turning the steering wheel, Luo An continued to ask, how did William and the others find this car? Well, William and the others followed your instructions and carefully checked all the surveillance in the area near the crime scene, and finally successfully found a vehicle that matched the description given by the person who reported the crime. Hearing Luo An's question, Mona's face showed an expression of envy and jealousy again, and she said, then William and the others discovered that this car was the latest model of Mercedes-Benz, which was equipped with a global positioning system, so they quickly located the car in Brooklyn. The latest model of Mercedes-Benz? Luo An's mouth twitched, and he turned his head and asked, this kind of car was lost, and the 18-year-old Quantal Walster didn't even notice it? He really didn't find it. With her 10 fingers typing on the keyboard, Mona pulled up Quantal Walster's information, showed it to Luo An, and smiled. The car was in Quantal's hands for less than 10 minutes before he accidentally crashed it and sent it to the repair shop for repair. This driving skill. Cool. The SUV shuttled through the traffic on the road at a high speed, and Luo An and Mona soon arrived at the abandoned factory in Brooklyn. All kinds of garbage was seen. In 2005, the federal economy was not bad, and there were not too many homeless people. If it was 3 years later, in 2008, when the financial crisis started, this area would be full of homeless people immediately. After opening the door and getting off the SUV, Luo An looked around the terrain and structure of the abandoned factory, frowning. It's really a good place to kill people and dump bodies. What? Hearing this, Mona was slightly stunned, but she didn't care and walked quickly to the Mercedes-Benz not far away. The car was placed carelessly among all kinds of garbage. As expected, the driver's cabin of the Mercedes-Benz was empty. Seeing that the trunk was tightly closed, Mona immediately opened the door of the cab, got in and started looking for the car keys. Luo An walked to the trunk, looked down, smelled it, and then turned around and left here. Picked up an iron rod at random and started to search in the nearby garbage dump. After much effort, Mona successfully found the car keys and got out from under the car. Seeing Roan's actions, she frowned. Roan, what are you doing? Of course I'm looking for Tris Perez. Roan continued to move and explained, I just said that this is a good place to kill people and dump bodies. As for whether Triss is still alive and lying in the trunk, thinking about the extremely fast movements of the murderer when kidnapping Triss and the murderer driving the car to this abandoned factory, Roan thought that the murderer would most likely not let Triss live. But hearing Roan's narration, Mona's face was very ugly. It made sense, but it was too straightforward. However, since the car keys had been found, there was no reason to give up. Mona immediately walked to the back, pressed the button, and opened the trunk. There was no one. Son of eating. Mona cursed the murderer. Turning to look for Luo An, Mona found him standing behind a garbage dump not far away, holding a metal rod he had picked up, with a grim look on his face. Mona was shocked to see this. She couldn't imagine what Luo An, who was usually calm and never panicked, had seen to show such an expression. Chapter 184 Saw Series. Seeing Luo An standing behind the garbage dump not far away with a grim look on his face, Mona hurried over and asked loudly, Luo An, what happened? Wait a minute. Mona. Hearing Mona's voice, Luo An hurriedly turned around, waved his hand and loudly signaled her not to come over. But Mona had already quickly walked to the side of the garbage dump and saw the scene behind the garbage dump. A breeze blew, and Mona's face turned pale in an instant. In a pile of rotten and smelly garbage, there were two bodies, a man and a woman. The watermelon of the male body in the striped suit was split in half, and there was a big hole in the belly of the female body. There were yellow, white, and red things everywhere, and the scene was horrible. This scene needs to be mosaicked even in the Federation. Fouquet. The combination of yellow, white, and red colors was too impactful, and Mona hurriedly turned around and left there, cursing in a low voice and suppressing the discomfort in her heart. Roan walked to Mona, patted her back, and said helplessly, are you okay? Yeah, I'm fine. Taking a deep breath, Mona stood up and shook her head, showing Roan an ugly smile. Mona had seen this type of corpse photos and observed corpses up close when she was in class at the FBI Academy. But photos are just photos, and the corpses observed were also processed in advance, so they were not so bloody. It was the first time for Mona to suddenly witness such a scene. And from the time point of view, Mona was still a newcomer and did not have as long work experience as Lassie. Feeling Roan's hand gently patting her back, Mona suddenly remembered something and asked hurriedly, Roan, is your face so ugly because you saw the corpse just now? Mona had heard from Lassie before that Roan discussed fast food with the old forensic doctor in the NYPD morgue. The scene of the corpse behind the garbage dump was indeed a bit scary, but it didn't seem to scare Roan. Yes and no. Seeing that Mona's condition had recovered a lot, Luo An replied slowly, I just analyzed a little bit, based on the condition of the corpse. Mona was far away from the corpse just now, and she didn't see many things clearly, but Luo An stood next to the corpse, and saw a lot more clearly. The 4 feet of the two corpses were handcuffed tightly together, indicating that the two people could not leave each other when they were alive. The nails on the left hands of the two corpses were all pulled out, indicating that they had been tortured by the murderer before they died. The purpose of the murderer doing this is probably to get some information from them. Not only that, there was a knife next to the male corpse, a small key on his right hand, and an axe in front. Combined with a big hole on the woman's abdomen and the iron handcuffs on their feet, Luo An speculated that the murderer had probably watched the Saw series released in 2004 and 2005 by a director named Wen. Son of. Hearing Luo An's speculation, Mona's face became even uglier, and she asked, you speculated that the female victim died at the hands of the male victim, then the male victim. Obviously, the murderer lied to him. Luo An took out his mobile phone and called the trace examination department, asking them to send someone over quickly and bring more bags because they couldn't fit less things. Then he explained to Mona, if I'm not mistaken, the murderer should have told the man that he would let him go as long as he got the key from the woman. But when the man really got the key, the murderer directly picked up the axe. Mona took a breath of cold air and then cursed. ******. Luo An nodded. This time the murderer obviously had psychological problems. By the way, walking back to the SUV, Mona picked up a bottle of water and drank 2 sips, then handed it to Luo An. Is the identity of the female victim confirmed to be Tris? Mona didn't see the faces of the 2 bodies clearly just now. Yeah, that's her. Luo An took the water from Mona and drank it. He nodded, but the identity of the male deceased, I'm afraid we can only know it after the trace examination department finishes the autopsy. The watermelon had been broken into 2 halves. Luo An was not a forensic doctor, so he couldn't tell the original face of the person with his naked eyes. Ding ling ling. At this moment, Luo An's cell phone in his pocket rang. He pressed the answer button. I'm Roan. It's me, Lassie. Lassie on the other end of the phone said directly, as per your request, I'm now in the company of Tris's architect boyfriend. According to colleagues in the company, Lol Post didn't come to work today, and he didn't answer the phone. I don't know where he went. They suggested that we go to his house to look for him. Hearing this, Roan's eyelids twitched, and asked, ask those colleagues, was Lol Post wearing a grey striped suit yesterday? There was a pause of a few seconds on the other end of the phone, and then Lass's affirmative answer came, yes, that's the one. Mona on the side heard this, closed her eyes and patted her head, and Roan sighed, okay, you and Riyadh can return to investigation team number 5. A few hours later, investigation team number 5. Ryder pushed open the door in front of the office area, distributed the materials in his hand to the detectives, and said, this is a rough autopsy report made by the trace examination department. According to the forensic judgment, the cause of death of the 2 victims is the same as what Roan said. Des Perez died of excessive bleeding in the abdomen, and Lol Post died from the axe next to him. Hearing Ryder's words, the detectives all cursed the murderer. Roan, sitting on the new chair, turned around with the materials and asked, Ryder, did the trace examination department find any clues at the scene? Are there any fingerprints of the murderer on the axe? They found footprints left by the 2 murderers at the scene. Ryder said that the trace examination department did not find the murderer's DNA or fingerprints, but only found traces of neoprene on this and Lol's clothes. Neoprene? Mona and Lassie tilted their heads in confusion. Ryder spread his hands, and he didn't know what it was. It's just rubber gloves. Roan threw the materials on the table with a speechless face. The guys in the trace examination department are always like this, throwing out a bunch of professional terms every time. Mona and Riyadh suddenly realized what was going on, while Lassie next to them frowned. So, we have no way of finding the murderer now? The footprints found by the trace examination department can be used as evidence in court in the future. But without fingerprints, DNA, surveillance videos and witnesses, it is impossible to find the murderer, based on footprints alone in a populous city like New York. Hearing this, the detectives of the number 5 investigation team looked at each other and fell silent. No, we still have one clue to check. When everyone was scratching their heads, Luo An clapped his hands to attract attention and said, everyone, don't forget that the murderer stole the Mercedes from the repair shop. Yes, that's right. Mona and the other 2 nodded repeatedly and realized, we may find clues in that auto repair shop. Yeah. Luo An stood up and said that he would go to the repair shop with Lassie to look for clues later, and then said to Mona with a serious face, Mona, you stay in the 5th investigation team and work with William and others to carefully investigate the information of this and Lol. I feel that there is a big problem behind this case. What information did the murderer want to get by interrogating the 2 with such a cruel method of pulling out nails? Hearing this, Mona immediately nodded and agreed. Leave it to us. Chapter 185 The Cat and the Murderer. In Queens, at a large auto repair shop, two kittens, one black and one white, were playing with each other at the door. Roan and Lassie walked through the door and into the shop, ignoring the messy voices, and asked loudly, who is the manager of this shop? I am. As soon as Roan finished speaking, a middle-aged white man in a denim suit came over and asked, what do you want to see me about? FBI, you can call me Roan. Taking out a golden badge from his pocket and showing it to the other party, Roan asked, did you lose a new Mercedes-Benz here? Yes. Hearing Roan's words, the middle-aged white man nodded hurriedly, stretched out his hand and shook hands with him, and said, my name is Frank Turner. I just came here early this morning and found that the window of the back door was broken. Following Frank's direction, Roan saw a door with a hole in the lower left corner of the window. It is not difficult to see that the murderer directly broke the glass, then reached in and twisted the door from the inside. Frank took Roan and Lassie to the place where the Mercedes was parked before and continued to explain, I called the police immediately after I found that the Mercedes was stolen. But the NYPD just came here to ask a few questions, record the license plate number, and then left here, asking me to wait for news. Frank had encountered this kind of thing when he was young. He knew very well that the Mercedes was unlikely to be found, and he would have to pay for it. Vehicles are lost every day in New York, but less than 1/10 are successfully found. Okay. Looking around, Roan pointed to the camera next to him and asked, did the anti-theft surveillance record anything? Most of them are under repair, and only one is still working. Frank regretted it very much. If he had known earlier, he would have urged the repairman. Roan nodded. Let's take a look at the surveillance. Although there is only one camera, the area it is responsible for is between the back door and the parking position of the Mercedes, and maybe there will be something to find. The surveillance video was soon played in front of Roan and Lassie. The video showed the time at 3:30 this morning, and a dark shadow walked in from the direction of the back door. Unfortunately, the car thief did not walk through the area monitored by the camera, but walked to the side of the Mercedes-Benz from the other side. Shit. Lassie frowned, turned around and looked at Frank next to her, and asked in a deep voice, how many people know that the camera in the store is under repair? Lassie felt that the murderer might be a regular customer of this store. Frank lowered his head and said nothing. Lassie looked puzzled. Why, you can't remember? Frank shook his head. No, there are too many people who know that the camera is under repair. I'm still counting. Lassie, don't worry about the camera for now. Before Lassie could complain speechlessly, Luo An next to her waved his hand, pointed to the screen in the video and asked, is this black shadow on the ground one of the two cats you keep at the door of your store? There was no sound in the surveillance video, but when the car thief entered the hall, the shadow on the ground showed that a black shadow had jumped on the car thief and then quickly left the back door. It's not them. I brought them this morning. Frank looked down at the surveillance camera. His face was very ugly. The cat in the surveillance camera is called Bush. It's another cat. The bastard was discovered by Bush when he stole the car, and then he shot it to death. A cat called Bush. Luo An raised his eyebrows, swallowed the spit in his mouth, looked at the shadow in the surveillance camera rushing towards the car thief, and asked in a deep voice, excuse me, can you hand it over to us? In the social customs of the Federation, the status of animals such as cats and dogs is often equivalent to family members. Because he didn't know if Frank had the same idea, Luo An asked for his opinion. What? Frank was slightly stunned. Bush has been buried by me. What do you want it for? Roan stood up, turned his head, and asked Lassie to copy the surveillance video, and then explained. The video shows that when the car thief appeared, it jumped on the other person, and the murderer shot it. So I feel that it is very likely that it was frightened, and its claws accidentally caught the car thief. If this is true, the trace examination department will have a chance to find the car thief's DNA based on the traces on the cat's claws. Hearing Roan's words, Lassie, who was copying the surveillance video, brightened up and hurriedly checked the surveillance video carefully. Frank was very shocked, silent for a few seconds, and nodded heavily and agreed. Okay. 3 o'clock in the afternoon, the office area of the 5th investigation team. Everyone, a great news. Just as Mona, William and others were struggling with the computer keyboard, Lassie was busy handing over the situation of the Mercedes-Benz car with the NYPD, and Roan was bored sitting on the new chair drinking coffee. When he was spinning around, Riyadh suddenly pushed open the door and ran in. Seeing that everyone's eyes were all turned to him, Riyadh explained loudly, Roan's judgment was indeed correct. The trace examination department found some fresh skin tissue in Bush's 2 front paws. According to the test, we found a name in the database, Rosalind Lewis. After hearing Riyadh's words, Roan clapped his hands with a smile on his face. Well done, Riyadh. No, it's Roan, you're awesome. Riyadh looked at Roan with admiration, and he also watched the video surveillance that Lassie brought back. Not only was it pitch black, but the cat appeared for a very short time. In such a situation, Roan was able to find the key clues to lock the enemy's identity. Riyad looked at Roan with gratitude, and he was also full of fighting spirit. He felt that this week's bonus was stable again. Compared with other people in the number 5 investigation team, Riyad, who has a wife and a son, pays more attention to the bonus after solving the case. Because of this, although Riyad is older than Roan, he has subconsciously obeyed Roan in the process of handling the case and put Roan's orders first. After receiving the information from Riyad, Roan turned around and said, "Mona, next. I have found the information about this Rosalind Lewis." Before Roan could finish his words, Mona threw him a pair of sanitary balls. When Riyad said the other person's name, she started to check. As expected of Mona, she's always so fast. With a chuckle, Roan ignored Mona's rolling eyes and asked, "What's the specific situation of this guy?" "Rosalind Lewis, 42 years old this year, his parents are dead, he never went to high school, and his home is in Upper Brooklyn." Mona tapped on the keyboard with her 10 fingers and answered. At the age of 18, he chose to join the army and later joined a mountain division. During some operations, Rosalind behaved very cruelly, raped children and raped women many times, causing dissatisfaction and complaints from many teammates. At the age of 33, Rosalind retired, and his subsequent information is unknown. But according to the information, he is one of the suspects in several murders, but there is no evidence. So the database speculates that he should have switched to a professional killer. At this point, Mona was stunned. If Rosalind is really just a killer, it means there is someone behind this case. Roan nodded. "Let's catch him first." The performance of federal soldiers in other countries is well known, and other soldiers have done what Rosalind did. But Rosalind could cause complaints from other soldiers. I think the scene at that time was probably quite unusual. Silently raising the danger level of Rosalind's mental illness in his heart, Luo An patted Riyad's shoulder, and the two walked quickly into the equipment warehouse. Looking at Riyad's back, William scratched his head. This time, Riyad should not be injured. Mona. Chapter 186. Teeth knocked out, speech leaks. Brooklyn's Upper District. Outside the street where Rosalind Lewis's house is located, Roan and Ryder are sitting in an SUV, and a team of fully armed SWAT members are sitting in a black troop carrier next to them. Picking up his watch to check the time, Roan pressed the communicator. "Have you arrived at the designated location?" Because the FBI database shows that Rosalind may have become a professional killer. Before taking specific actions, Roan first sent several SWAT members to quietly check the situation around the house. Arrived at the designated location. The voice of a SWAT member came from the communicator. The target person is in the living room on the first floor. In addition to him, there are 2 white men in the house. The 3 of them have weapons in their hands and are drinking at this time. Good. Roan nodded, glanced at Ryder next to him, pressed the communicator again, and said in a deep voice, "Fully block the intersections around the house. Start the action." As soon as the voice fell, the door of the SWAT troop carrier opened instantly, and a team of fully armed SWAT members immediately moved quickly towards Rosalind's house, followed by Roan and Ryder. Arriving at the door of the house silently, the leading SWAT team member did not use a battering ram this time, but directly raised his shotgun and smashed the door handle with a bang. Boom. Then, another SWAT team member kicked the door open and rushed in with a rifle. "FBI, put down your weapons. Don't move. Lie on the ground." The moment the door was kicked open by the SWAT team, the 3 men in the room moved in completely different ways. One of them was a white man in a suit with a big belly. He was terrified and immediately covered his head and crawled under the table, shaking wildly. Another white man who was drinking threw away the can of beer in his hand, picked up the pistol beside him without hesitation, and pulled the trigger at the SWAT team member. Bang, bang. 2 gunshots. The SWAT team member had a special bulletproof shield in front of him, and the bullets fired by the white man only splashed a spark on it. Another bullet was fired from the Glock 18 in Riyad's hand, hitting the white man's chest directly, and the man's body instantly collapsed to the ground. Seeing his friend in front of him, the big-bellied white man trembled even more. When the door of the target person, Rosalind Lewis, was in the kitchen refrigerator to get a new beer, when the door was opened. Crash. Hearing the voice of the FBI, Roslin jumped on the spot without saying a word, hit his head against the glass, and jumped out of the house from the kitchen window, intending to escape from the side of the house. Chase. Seeing this scene, Riyad yelled, and immediately turned around, and led the SWAT team to leave from the door behind everyone, run out of the house and chase the other party. Seeing this, the fully armed Roan narrowed his eyes, ran directly into the kitchen, and flipped out along the broken glass of Roslin. Boom. The moment he flipped out of the window, Roan was about to get up, and saw Roslin running towards him. Seeing the other party's hand stretched out in a grabbing posture towards him, Luo An's mind turned, and he instantly understood the other party's idea to take him hostage. After all, the several exits and entrances that could leave the house were blocked by SWAT members arranged by Luo An in advance. The only way to leave here is to capture a hostage and use him to threaten the SWAT members. It happened that he jumped out alone behind him. But, looking at the figure of the other party running towards him, Luo An grinned, then stood up and kicked out. Seeing the smile on Luo An's face, Roslin, who was indeed thinking of taking a hostage in his heart, was slightly stunned. But now the situation is urgent, and the surroundings have been completely blocked by SWAT members. There is only one lone guy who jumped out of the house with him, who can be captured as a hostage. The other party is indeed fully armed, but Roslin is not panicked at all. With his many years of experience as a killer and the fighting experience trained by the life and death line, Roslin is fully confident. He is confident that in just a few seconds, he can turn all the equipment on the other party into his own weapons. Especially when he saw that the other party did not shoot at him immediately, but kicked at him. Roslin also smiled. This is safe. Raising his arm to block Luo An's kick, Roslin blinked. The sound of the wind from this kick seems a bit loud. Bang. A heavy kick, several teeth flying in the air. Before Roslin could react, he flew out like a cannonball, and then fell headfirst into the trash can next to him. One force defeats 10 skills. The ancients are not deceiving me. Putting down his legs, Luo An smiled, and the physical and strength potions he had taken these days were not in vain. Roslin was kicked by Luo An. His ears were buzzing, and stars were in his eyes. If it weren't for years of exercise, Roslin's head would be hard, and he felt that his brains would be kicked out. Climbing out of the fallen trash can in a panic, Roslin felt that his head was in great pain. He reached out and touched his face. His nose and face were swollen and all covered with blood. Fouquet. Just as Roslin was about to stand up and fight back, Roan had already walked to his side. He kicked the pistol on the ground far away. Then Roan took out the handcuffs and handcuffed Roslin's hands together in no time. %*. Roslin finally reacted and cursed, but because several teeth were knocked out, his speech was a little slurred. Roan waved his hand. Stop cursing. Stop cursing. I can't hear what you are saying at all. Hearing this, Roslin's face instantly turned red. Especially when Roan was very kind to help him point out the teeth on the ground, and asked him if he wanted to keep them as a souvenir. Roslin was almost vomiting blood out of anger. At this time, Riyad and a group of SWAT team members also rushed here. Roan. Are you okay? Seeing Roslin's swollen face and Roan's smiling face, Riyad felt that he couldn't continue his worried words. The SWAT team was shocked that Roan had caught the other person so quickly. Seeing the situation on Roslin's face, they were also very confused. What happened in just a few seconds? I'm fine. Patting Ryder's shoulder, Roan handed the foul-mouthed Roslin to the SWAT team and asked, what's the situation with the guy hiding under the table in the house? I don't know. He looks very scared of us, but he doesn't say a word. Ryder shook his head, but I have asked the SWAT team to catch him and send his photo back to the 5th investigation team. With Mona's speed, we should be able to find out his identity soon. Okay. Roan nodded, turned around and prepared to go into Roslin's house to search for clues. At this moment, the feeling of discomfort all over his body surged into his heart again. Although he lacked the urgency of the feeling of burning his butt, Roan still stood still. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw 2 SWAT team members pulling Roslin towards a nearby troop carrier. Thinking of how the other party had interrogated Triss and Lowell by pulling out their fingernails, Roan suddenly thought of something. His pupils shrank, and he shouted loudly, everyone, get down. What? Hearing Roan's shout, everyone present was stunned. Although they didn't know what happened, they still bent down subconsciously. Boom. At this moment, a bullet hole suddenly appeared on the SWAT troop carrier. Then, a special gunshot appeared in the ears of everyone present. Chapter 187 Sniper. Sniper. There's a sniper. Take cover. The bullets were in front and the sound was behind. All the SWAT members present understood the current situation and shouted loudly while bending down to find cover. Not only that, one of the SWAT members who had served in the Marine Corps also explained loudly, M40. The sniper rifle used by the other party is M40. He was very familiar with this gun. Where is Roslyn? Hearing the model of the sniper rifle, Roan frowned and hurriedly asked about the situation of their target. How is Roslyn Lewis now? The moment the bullet hole appeared on the SWAT troop carrier just now, Roan clearly saw a trace of blood. Behind the troop carrier, the SWAT member who hurriedly lay down after hearing Roan's shouting, felt that he had saved his life, and looked at Roan with gratitude. At the same time, the SWAT member tightly covered Roslyn's bleeding neck on the ground with both hands and shouted, Roslyn was shot on the edge of the neck. Call an ambulance immediately. Although he was shot on the edge of the neck, he could still be saved. If Roan hadn't just shouted, the two SWAT members would have subconsciously pressed down on Roslyn. According to the position of the bullet marks on the troop carrier, Roslyn would have been shot in the head. Thinking of this, Ryder and the other SWAT members looked at Roan with shock and gratitude. As for how Roan had discovered the sniper in advance, the people present did not ask Roan's thoughts. They had already thought of a reason for Roan in their hearts. Intuition. Whether it was the soldiers in the army or the SWAT members, they had been fighting with the enemy on the line of life and death for many years, and they had their own intuition to a greater or lesser extent, and these intuitions often saved their lives. In the eyes of the SWAT members, Roan was obviously the kind of person with a particularly strong sense of intuition. Thinking of this, most SWAT members put Roan at the top of the list of most wanted to go on a mission together, and planned to build a good relationship with Roan in the future, and invite him out for a drink after the mission. The reason is simple. Going on a mission with someone with a strong intuition, like Roan, will definitely increase the chance of survival. Knowing that Roslyn was not dead, Roan was relieved, and quickly pressed the communicator and said loudly, call an ambulance as quickly as possible. Okay. Hearing the affirmative reply in the communication, Roan hurriedly stood up and observed the bullet marks on the troop carrier, his mind turning quickly. The SWAT team member just now said that the other party used an M40 sniper rifle, which has an effective range of 1000 yards, or about 910 meters. The time when the bullet marks appeared and the time when the sound appeared was about 2 seconds apart. The speed of sound is 340, plus the wind speed and Roslyn's position just now. Soon, Roan identified several places where the sniper was suspected to have fired, and then led the agents to rush over quickly. Unfortunately, when the SWAT team members arrived at those locations, they did not find the sniper. Roan, based on the killer's experience, judged others by himself, and successfully took Riyad to the roof of an unmanned villa, and found traces of enemy shooting. But the other party was obviously an experienced veteran. He retreated immediately after missing a shot. He was very decisive and did not leave any relevant clues to confirm the other party's identity. When Roan and Riyad returned to the number 5 investigation team, it was late and they were about to get off work. Now this case is getting more and more complicated. Augustus couldn't sit still in the team leader's office after learning that someone used a sniper rifle. Like the rocket launcher, the sniper rifle is also a weapon that the NYPD and the FBI attach great importance to. Roan, who was sitting in the chair, rubbed his temple and felt a little headache. Seeing Roan with a frown on his face, Mona silently poured him a cup of coffee and said, Ryder and Lassie are on duty to take care of Roslyn tonight. The guy's neck injury is a bit serious. The operation may take a long time. But after his operation is completed, we can conduct the interrogation. At this point, Mona, William and others all looked at Roan with admiration. They also heard that Roan's intuition was very accurate. As for Roslyn, the situation in this case has become much clearer. Taking a sip of coffee, Roan whispered a thank you to Mona, then walked to the front of the office area, pulled over a whiteboard to write and draw, and analyzed Someone hired Roslyn to kidnap Tris Perez and Lol Post, hoping to get some information from them. When they told the news, Roslyn killed them and threw their bodies into the garbage dump. If it weren't for the cat named Bush, we would probably never find Roslyn, and this case would become an unsolved case. That's right. Augustus, who was standing next to the whiteboard, nodded and continued. When we went to arrest Roslyn, the person behind the scenes sent a killer to use a sniper rifle to kill him, trying to completely erase the clues of this case. So, who is this mastermind behind the scenes? What exactly are they trying to hide? I don't know. After drawing a big greeting on the whiteboard, Roan threw the pen away, turned around, and said to Augustus with a serious face, "But I'm worried about another thing now. It's the life of that Roslyn, right?" Augustus patted his belly, indicating that he knew what Roan was thinking, and explained, "In addition to Ryder and Lassie, I also contacted 2 SWAT teams. They will watch over Roslyn 24 hours a day and never let Roslyn out of their sight. Not just Roslyn." Roan shook his head. "Roslyn is important, but he is not the most important." Augustus was stunned and asked in confusion, "What do you mean?" "And our number 5 investigation team, we are the main force in solving the case." Pouring himself a cup of coffee, tilting his head and drinking it, Roan said, "If the mastermind behind the scenes is forced into a corner, he may attack the agents of our number 5 investigation team." "What? Impossible." Hearing this, William and other technical agents looked tense. Mona slapped the table and stood up, and Augustus's dark face darkened several degrees. "Are you sure? Kidnapping and murdering FBI agents will only make oneself fall into the FBI's targeting and investigation across the Federation. This price is not something that ordinary people can afford. But this situation has happened before." "I'm not sure." Luo An shook his head. He couldn't say for sure about such things. But considering that the other party dared to use a killer with psychological problems like Roslyn, before handling such a case, one must always be mentally prepared and plan in advance, right? "Son of eating." Augustus cursed in a low voice, his hands folded in front of his chest, his eyes turned, and his expression was uncertain. After thinking for a long time, Augustus let out a long breath, raised his head and said, "Luo An, you just lead our number 5 investigation team to solve the case. Leave this matter to me." Encountering such a thing, Augustus never thought of retreating. As a leader, it is his responsibility to protect the people below. "Okay, sir." Luo An nodded. He likes leaders like Augustus who really stand up when there is something. Augustus left the office area quickly. Roan raised his eyebrows, turned to look at Mona, and asked, "How is it, Mona? I asked you to check Tris's information before. Did you find anything?" "I didn't find any clues here about Tris." Hearing this, Mona sat back in her original position, her 10 fingers flying on the keyboard, and said, "But I did find some amazing things from her boyfriend, Lol Post." Chapter 188 The real controller of the company. Hearing that Mona had found clues from another dead person, Roan immediately became interested. Lol Post is an architect, and he has a small company. Mona pulled out the information of the construction company, showed it to Roan, and said, "A month and a half ago, the company had some problems with its capital chain. But not long after, a new fund appeared in the company to fill the gap." Roan sat on the chair and smiled. "If I'm not mistaken, the owner of this fund is Tris." Snap. Mona raised her hand and snapped her fingers, indicating that Roan guessed correctly, and continued to tap the keyboard a few times, saying, "The amount of this fund is not small. Tris can't pay it out by herself. The only explanation I can think of is that Tris used her position as chief financial officer to embezzle the funds of the cosmetics company." Roan nodded, which was also his speculation. "There's one more thing." Then, Mona pulled out another file, which contained a consumption record. "This is Lol's consumption record at a famous French restaurant in Manhattan a month ago. I checked the dining situation of that restaurant, and found that Lol booked the restaurant for 2 hours that night in order to propose to Tris." Huh. Hearing this, Roan immediately stood up and became interested. Looking carefully at the time of the proposal, Roan raised his eyebrows and asked, "The time that Lassie said that Tris and Lol broke up seemed to be the day after the proposal." "That's right." Mona nodded heavily, although I don't know what happened during the proposal. According to the restaurant waiter, the two of them had a very unpleasant quarrel that night. TSK, TSK, TSK. Roan rested his chin on his hand and leaned back in his chair. Lowell and Triss have been together for more than 2 years. When Lowell's company encountered problems, Triss also embezzled the company's public funds to help him. This seems to be a perfect match. But why did Triss reject Lowell's proposal? After a long silence, Luo An suddenly thought of something and asked, I remember Lowell has a younger brother? Moan looked at the information and nodded. The next day, morning, in the construction company in Queens, upon learning of Roan and Mona's purpose, Lowell's younger brother Trent Post shook his head. I'm sorry, I don't know about my brother's proposal. Hearing this, the smile on Mona's face slowly disappeared, while the smile on Roan's face next to him became brighter. Are you sure about this statement, Mr. Post? Why, no. Trent narrowed his eyes slightly. According to federal law, I have the right to refuse to answer your questions. Of course you have this power, but we also have the right to investigate anyone involved in a criminal case. Roan bought himself and Mona a cup of coffee, took a sip, and said with a smile, this means we can subpoena your call records, emails, and your internet browsing records at night, etc. What did you say? Trent's face changed, and Roan continued to speak slowly. In addition, according to our investigation, there are some problems with the financial situation of your brother's construction company. We have the right to investigate its operating conditions and financial information. Okay. Hearing this, Trent, who owned shares in this construction company, finally couldn't sit still anymore and slowly forced a stiff smile on his face. Don't be so serious, Agent. What question did you ask just now? About my brother's proposal, right? I do know something about it. Then tell me. Putting the coffee cup back on the table, Roan curled his lips, thinking the coffee was of low quality and not tasty, and then stared at Trent's expression and movements when he spoke. Seeing the disgusted expression on Luo An's face, Trent's mouth twitched, and he pondered for a few seconds and slowly said, my brother failed to propose that night. He tried to win back the woman afterwards, but they broke up in the end. The main reason for the breakup was that the woman said that she could date my brother, but not marry him, because she was under too much pressure, and her life was too crazy. Hearing these reasons, my brother was very angry and thought she was just making excuses. But my brother really likes that woman, so he has been coming to me for drinks for more than a month. Luo An continued to ask, did your brother mention what the pressure and madness that this mentioned was? No. Trent shook his head. My brother didn't tell me, and I don't think he knows. If my brother knew, he might not have broken up with that woman, right? Mr. Post. As soon as Trent finished speaking, Luo An patted his thigh and stood up, with a smile on his face. The information shows that you graduated from Harvard University. As a top student at Harvard University, why did you choose to lie in front of FBI agents? Hearing this, Mona, who was recording something, hurriedly stopped what she was doing, and then cast a cold look at Trent. In Mona's cognition, if Luo An said that the other party was lying, then the other party must be lying. What? Trent was stunned, and a trace of panic appeared in his eyes. Luo An took a step forward, still smiling but with a cold tone. You pull your collar when you talk, your eyes are erratic, and your words and body actions are completely opposite. Mr. Trent, has anyone told you that you are actually not good at lying? Looking at the cold light in Luo An's eyes in front of him, Trent broke out in a cold sweat, and didn't know what to say. Bang. Seeing this, Luo An slammed the table hard, which scared Trent. Then Roan turned around and said to Mona, call the team leader. Trent Post has repeatedly concealed things from the FBI and hindered our investigation. Apply now. No. Before Roan finished speaking, Trent hurriedly shouted, I'll tell you everything. Mona, who was taking out her phone, heard this and cast an admiring look at Roan calmly. Roan's mouth curled slightly. It was just a small matter, not worth mentioning. The office was silent for a long time. Facing Roan's cold eyes, Trent opened his mouth and finally told what he had concealed. In fact, my brother proposed to this for another purpose. Trent picked up the coffee and drank it all in his stomach, saying, that is to find a way to get the shares of that cosmetics company through this. After graduating from college, Lowell had been working hard in society for so many years. Although he had a small company, the company's business performance had not been good. It happened that Lowell met this at that time, so he had the idea of relying on this to reach the peak of his life. X2. Hearing Trent's narration, Roan was speechless, while Mona's face was full of contempt. As a woman, she was disgusted by this kind of deceiving behavior under the guise of love. After a few seconds of silence, Roan asked with some doubt, Triss is only the chief financial officer of that cosmetics company. How did Lowell want to get the company's shares from her? My brother didn't tell me the details. Trent swallowed and told the truth, but once my brother was drunk, he said that the female boss of that cosmetics company was just a puppet in a sense, and the real controller was actually the chief financial officer Triss Perez. What? Hearing this, Mona immediately raised her head with a face full of shock. Chapter 189. Did you touch money that shouldn't be touched? The SUV sped towards the Jacob Federal Building. Mona sat in the passenger seat, scratching her head while looking at the notebook in her hand. Roan turned the steering wheel and drove the SUV to quickly overtake a car. He asked in a serious tone, have you found out the identity of the big-bellied white man we caught yesterday? Of course, and I also found out why he went to see Roslyn yesterday. Mona nodded, opened her laptop, and after a few taps, she said, that guy is a killer broker named Adam, who has worked with Roslyn before. He went to see Roslyn yesterday because he had an order and wanted to ask if the other party would accept it. The order to kill Triss was Roslyn's private job, and Adam didn't know about it. Okay. Roan was about to continue asking questions when the phone in his pocket suddenly rang. He pressed the answer button, and a familiar voice came from the other end of the phone. It's me, Lassie. Thank you for your hard work. Lassie and Riyadh had been guarding Roslyn last night, and it was indeed very hard. The two exchanged a few simple pleasantries, and Roan asked, how is it? Did Roslyn confess? No, he said nothing. In the hospital corridor, Lassie looked at Roslyn lying on the bed with an angry face and gritted her teeth and said, no matter what method Riyadh and I use, Roslyn will not tell you who asked him to kill Triss and Lowell. Hearing this, Mona, who was sitting in the passenger seat, frowned. She didn't understand why the mastermind had hired someone to kill Roslyn with a sniper rifle to silence him, but Roslyn still chose not to confess. Roan, who was driving, nodded expressionlessly. It's about the same as I thought. What do you mean? Mona and Lassie were immediately puzzled when they heard this. Roan did not keep the secret and explained from his own perspective. This shows that the pressure from the mastermind to Roslyn is much greater than the pressure we put on him. In other words, Roslyn felt that if he did not confess and went to prison, he might have a chance to survive. If he confessed, even with the help of the FBI, Roslyn felt that he would not be able to escape death. This was a new idea that came to Roan's mind after hearing Trent's words just now. Fouquet. Son of eating. Mona and Lassie cursed. But they also realized a problem, that is, the mastermind behind the scenes might be more powerful than they thought. Lassie, you and Riyadh should go back to the 5th investigation team first. Glancing at Mona, who was sitting in the co-pilot with a gloomy face, Roan hung up the phone without changing his expression. The 5th investigation team, office area. Everyone. Standing at the front of the office area, Roan held a folder and said loudly to the eyes of the agents, according to the description of the male victim's brother, Triss Perez is a real leader of the cosmetics company. So next, we have to carefully investigate all of Triss's information. This time the information must be detailed. We not only need to know where Triss was born and which university she attended, but also those people she has contacted, who those people are, and which hotel she has stayed in recent years, where she has traveled, and who her phone contacts are. Understood? Hearing Roan's request, Mona, William and other technical agents all felt their scalps tingling, but they still agreed loudly. Seeing everyone's 10 fingers begin to dance on the computer keyboard, Roan nodded with satisfaction, then turned to look at Augustus on the side. Sir, there is something I need your help with. Augustus's mouth twitched when he heard this. It was a request, but Roan's tone clearly did not mean for him to refuse. Who is the boss? However, Augustus did not care about this matter. After all, solving the case was more important, so he asked directly, "What is it?" "I want to check the financial status of the cosmetics company where Tris works," Luo An replied, "but no one in our investigation team 5 is proficient in this aspect. And Tris is the chief financial officer herself, and her accounts must be difficult to check, so we need someone to help." In connection with all the previous clues, Luo An now seriously suspected that there was a problem with the finances of the cosmetics company. For example, Tris moved money that should not be moved. In order not to alert the enemy, he could not apply for a search warrant now, and could only investigate secretly. Hearing Luo An's words, Augustus rolled his eyes, smiled and nodded and agreed. "Okay, leave it to me." Seeing Luo An standing at the front of the office area with his hands on his hips, Augustus strode away from the investigation team 5. Mona, William and other agents look strange. Who is the leader of the investigation team 5? When Lassie and Reed finally drove back from the hospital, they saw this scene. In the office area of the investigation team 5, the agents were sweating and typing on the computer keyboards. In the conference room, 7 or 8 large boxes were stacked together. Augustus, a thin middle-aged white woman, and several young men and women in black suits were busy among the papers and computers. Roan sat at his workstation, turning around with a folder in his hand, and occasionally took a sip of coffee. Lassie, Reed. After a few hours, Mona, William and other technical agents finally investigated Tris's entire experience from birth to the present, as well as who she had contacted and what those people were like. "Well done." Roan stood up from his chair, strode to the front of the office area, pulled over a whiteboard and asked, "How is it? Have you found any problems?" "I found something." William raised his hand and said loudly, "The information shows that this is an orphan who grew up in a church in California. But that church was demolished a few years ago because of some cases. The information inside shows that this left there when she was 4 years old and was adopted by a white woman. But when this was in school, the information showed that she had been in the church. So this actually had a blank period of time." Roan nodded, wrote this on the whiteboard, then turned around and continued to ask, "Anything else? I also found a special place here." Mona raised her hand and said, "Since this came to New York at the age of 30, every 3 months, from the 25th to the 29th, she would take a plane from New York to California. What's going on? Where did she go?" Lassie on the side leaned over and asked puzzledly, "Los Angeles? Hollywood?" Seeing that everyone turned their eyes to her, Mona explained, "According to the information, she went to Malibu. Malibu, located in the west of Los Angeles, is famous for its beaches and sunshine. It is an area with dense high-end residential buildings, a favorite place for celebrities, surfing masters and people with dreams. It has been the filming location of many American movies since the 1950s. Lassie scratched her head. "So, Tris goes there for a vacation every 3 months to relax herself?" "I'm afraid not." Thinking of what William said just now, Roan narrowed his eyes slightly, and a guess came to his mind, so he asked, "Mona, can you find out where Tris went in Malibu? Who was she with during those days?" Roan felt that he was getting closer and closer to the truth. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 190, The Truth. The data shows that Tris has a small villa in Malibu. Mona's fingers flew on the keyboard and she answered, "Every time Tris arrives at the villa, she will be picked up from there. I checked the car that picked her up, and the owner's name is Juan Alberto Canas." After repeating this somewhat difficult name that was obviously from the Spanish language, Roan asked, "Who is he? What's his identity information?" "I know him. That guy is a rich tycoon." Without waiting for Mona to answer, Lassie, who had been sitting next to her, stood up and said solemnly, "And his father was one of the leaders of the previous generation of Manuscript 13. Manuscript 13, one of the most dangerous gangs in the federal territory, originated in El Salvador, South America, and its members are spread across all states and major cities in the United States. Not only that, Manuscript 13 also participates in drug trafficking in Mexico, and its methods are more cruel and radical than those of local gangs. The FBI database shows that members of the organization in the San Francisco area once brutally killed a family just because they blocked the guy's car. When Lassie worked in the intelligence department, she had collected information about the Manuscript 13 gang and had seen information about Juan Alberto Cana's father. Unlike other guys in Manuscript 13 who had been struggling at the bottom of society, Cana's father fought hard in the gang and immediately sent Canas to the federal government after gaining a certain status so that he could study hard. Canas lived up to his father's expectations. Not only did he perform well and often received scholarships, he was finally admitted to Boston University and was rated as an outstanding graduate of the university. So, what you mean is, Reed also came to his senses at this time, with an incredible expression on his face. As the CFO of a large company, Triss is with this guy Canas every once in a while. I'm afraid it's not just Triss. Thinking of Triss's blank childhood experience, the time when Canas's father sent Canas to the Federation, and Canas's age this year, Roan narrowed his eyes slightly, and continued to ask, does Canas meet with other people every once in a while? You are right. After checking the entire itinerary of the car that picked up Triss, Mona made a list on the computer and said seriously, in addition to Triss, there are 3 other people who are about her age. They are all women, and their professions are also CFOs of certain companies. Good. Patting Mona on the shoulder, Roan thought for a while, looked at William and asked, how are the phone records of those around Triss going? We found 2 unexpected phone records. William leaned back and showed the information in the computer to Roan. Roan looked down and clapped his hands hard. I knew it. Then, Roan took the folder and walked quickly to the front of the office area and began to write and draw on the whiteboard. After a long time, the whiteboard was full of handwriting. Roan straightened up and threw the pen casually, facing the eyes of the agents, and explained, based on the information that all of us in the number 5 investigation team have worked together to investigate, the truth of this case can be almost deduced. Although Canas's father was born in a humble family, he had a very long-term vision. He not only realized the importance of knowledge, but also kept Canas away from the fighting and killing inside Manuscript 13, and sent Canas to study in the Federation, making a good plan for Canas' future. Canas's father collected young female orphans in advance, brainwashed them to listen to Canas in the future, and then asked them to study hard, so that they could become Canas's future helpers. After graduating from college, Canas began to send these women to help him manage the company as chief financial officers, and Triss was one of them. As Canas got older, Triss, who had entered her prime and lived abroad for a long time, did not have the courage to resist Canas, but she had the courage to find a boyfriend to make herself happy. Thinking that the boss of the cosmetics company was a puppet, whose role was probably to monitor Triss, Luo An felt that Canas probably knew about Triss's boyfriend, but just turned a blind eye. Judging from her performance over the years, Triss was the kind of woman who could distinguish between the primary and the secondary. However, Luo An thought there was another possibility, that is, after years of one-on-many, the older Canas must have begun to be unable to stand it. But Canas did not expect that Lowell, who wanted to rely on Triss to reach the peak of his life, would use all his strength every time he played games, making Triss's heart closer and closer to Lowell, and finally even helped Lowell solve the capital chain problem of the construction company privately. When Lowell proposed to her, Triss suddenly woke up and gritted her teeth to refuse him. But Triss still had Lowell in her heart, and she hated this double life, so she would go to someone to drink and cry after get off work. The female boss of the cosmetics company was responsible for monitoring Triss. When she found that Triss had embezzled and was drunk and crying, she called Canas. Upon hearing the news, Canas immediately asked his men to contact Rosalind Lewis without any hesitation. These were the 2 phone records William just mentioned. They appeared just a few hours before Lowell and Triss were kidnapped by Rosalind Lewis, one before and one after. Son of shit. After listening to Roan's narration, Mona and Lassie cursed in their low voices. Riyad above was looking at the content on the whiteboard and asked thoughtfully, so, Rosalind used the method of pulling out nails to interrogate Triss and Lowell. The purpose was to find out the flow of the funds, right? Hearing this, Roan shook his head and denied, no, it shouldn't be. Hearing this, Mona and Lassie, who were about to nod, were stunned, and Riyad's posture of pouring coffee also froze. The three of them looked at Roan and asked, what is that? Don't forget, Canis's father was one of the leaders of the previous generation of Manuscript 13. Pointing to the information and photos in Mona's computer, Roan took a sip of coffee and said, although his father has passed away, Canis still maintains a close connection with Manuscript 13, and these photos are proof of it. And the information Mona showed just now shows that the companies under Canis and these women are not small in scale, but most of them are fixed assets. But Canis has always had a considerable cash flow, and those companies have never lacked funds since their establishment. There is only one reason I can think of for this situation, and that is, before Roan could finish, all the detectives from Investigation Team 5 suddenly realized, and said in unison, money laundering. That's right. Roan nodded. This should be the reason why Canis was in a hurry to interrogate and kill Triss and Lowell. Canis wanted to know if Triss had told anyone else about this. After all, what he feared most was that the money laundering would be exposed. That was the foundation of his life. At this moment, the door to the conference room suddenly opened, and Augustus walked out with a smile on his face. Chapter 191 Eyes and Arrest. Your guess is right, Luo An. After listening to Luo An's analysis, Augustus smiled and patted his shoulder with great satisfaction. That cosmetics company is indeed suspected of money laundering. The amount is over 100 million, and we have found evidence. Great. I knew it. Hearing Augustus' words, all the agents of the number 5 investigation team were delighted, clapping and cheering loudly. As expected, this week's bonus has been settled again. Everyone looked at Luo An's back and felt that he seemed to be glowing. Golden light. After he had cheered, he said directly, I will go to apply for the procedures now, and then go to arrest the boss of that cosmetics company. Wait a minute. Riyad was about to leave the number 5 investigation team excitedly, but Luo An hurriedly stopped him. Waving his hand to signal Riyad not to be anxious and wait a few minutes, Luo An turned around and walked into the team leader's office with Augustus. After both parties sat down, Augustus asked, what's wrong, Luo An? What did you find? Luo An did not keep the secret and said directly, it's easy to catch the boss of the cosmetics company. But the real culprit behind this case is that Canis, and we don't have any direct evidence related to him yet. The person who called the killer, Rosalind Lewis, was Canis's subordinate who drove the car. With Canis's financial resources, he could afford a lawyer to defend him and then say in front of the judge that this matter had nothing to do with him. Those companies controlled by women have a bunch of shell companies and limited companies behind them, and their registered places are still in the Cayman Islands. It is impossible to find out the shareholding structure behind them and find evidence of Canis money laundering in a short period of time. If the time is delayed too long, it will also be disadvantageous to this case. It doesn't matter, Luo An, I will handle this matter. Hearing Luo An's worried words, Augustus smiled slightly to show that he was not panicked at all. Luo An was slightly stunned, then he thought of something, and the worry on his face slowly disappeared. He asked, I wonder what the chief is going to do. This is a money laundering case involving hundreds of millions of dollars. Augustus took a sip of coffee and was very satisfied with Luo An's reaction speed. He replied, wait until you catch the boss of the cosmetics company, and then the rest of the matter will naturally be handed over to professionals. Who are the professionals? Of course, the eyes. Hearing this, Luo An's face suddenly brightened. Investigating evidence of money laundering is very troublesome. It is not only time consuming and labor intensive, but also requires a large number of people. Their number 5 investigation team simply does not have so many people, and they cannot spend all the follow-up time on this case. Handing the follow-up to the eyes, and letting the eyes keep an eye on Canis and find evidence will not only save time and effort, but also that group of people will definitely be more active than the number 5 investigation team, and they are more willing to send Canis to prison. Luo An and his team don't have to worry about being robbed of credit because the case was handled by their number 5 investigation team before, and the people involved in the case were also arrested by them. With the people in their hands, the credit will not go away. Afterwards, not only will the bonus be securely in hand, but the eyes must also give their investigation team number 5 a share of the reward after Canis was sent to prison. After figuring out the connection, Luo An looked at Augustus with great admiration. As expected of someone who came out of the criminal investigation department, he was really good at taking advantage of the situation. Seeing Luo An's eyes, Augustus looked calm on the surface, but he had already laughed out loud in his heart. Finally, he pretended in front of Luo An for once. It was not easy. After coughing twice, Augustus put down the coffee cup in his hand and said in a deep voice, "So, next we must catch the boss of the cosmetics company. She is very important." "No problem." Luo An nodded heavily. The female boss was related to the bonus of this case, and he would never let her escape. After leaving the team leader's office, Luo An didn't waste any words and immediately took Riyad into the equipment warehouse. Black combat uniform, tactical helmet, plate armor vest, 3 smoke bombs, 10 stun grenades, 2 Glock 18 submachine guns, 5 pistols with extended magazines. After finishing the equipment, Ron and Riyad looked at each other, grinned, and strode out of the number 5 investigation team. In a cosmetics company building in Manhattan, the elevator door slowly opened. The fully armed drone pressed the communicator and walked out with Riyad. "Hello." Ignoring the exclamations of the 2 beautiful girls at the front desk, Ron walked directly into the company, casually pulled over a white woman who looked like a secretary, and asked, "We are here to find Leilani Keller. This is the name of the female boss of this cosmetics company." Seeing Ron and Riyad who were fully armed, the secretary swallowed and replied, "Sorry, she's not here." Ron frowned slightly, turned around and walked around her to the door of the boss's office, and did not knock on the door, but pushed it open with force. The office was empty. "Hey, you can't do this. You're going too far. Do you have a search warrant?" Seeing Ron's actions, in addition to the female secretary just now, several white men appeared out of nowhere and posed coquettishly, but they were easily stopped by Riyad. Seeing the colorful hair and colorful clothes of these white men, Ron felt a toothache. It's worthy of being a cosmetics company. "Here is the search warrant you want." Swallowing the discomfort in his heart, Ron reached out and pulled over the guy who shouted the loudest and slapped the search warrant directly on his chest. Then Ron turned his head to look at everyone and said sternly, "Listen, if you know where Leilani Keller went, but you don't tell us, believe me, I can definitely send you all to jail for deceiving agents and disrupting official business." Hearing Ron's words, everyone present suddenly quieted down. Turning to look at the female secretary, Luo An's eyes flashed with coldness, and he asked in a cold voice, "Tell me, where did Leilani Keller go?" Looking at Luo An's face close at hand and the serious expression on his face, the female secretary swallowed her saliva and quickly replied, "The boss went to the private airport in southern Long Island and just left half an hour ago. I just saw her answer a call. It seemed to be from the bank. She was startled, so she left quickly." "Bank?" Luo An frowned when he heard it, not understanding why there was a bank thing in it. But now is not the time to think about these things. Walking around the female secretary, Luo An quickly walked to the elevator and lowered his head to say to the communicator, "Did you hear everything, Mona?" Since entering this company, Luo An's communicator has not been turned off. "I heard it." The sound of typing on the keyboard came from the other end of the communicator, and Mona replied, "I just found out that Leilani Keller, like their sparrows, has a partial share of a private jet. The plane is now waiting on the runway of the private airport in southern Long Island." The captain reported that only Leilani Keller was on the passenger list. Good. The elevator quickly reached the first floor. Ron took Riyad and ran to the parking lot, saying, "Contact the air traffic control department immediately and ask them to prohibit this plane from taking off. Also, find out who the bank employee who called Leilani Keller just now is. Lassie, go and catch him for me immediately." "No problem." Two crisp responses came from the communicator, and Ron and Riyad also ran to the side of the SUV. Opening the car door and turning the key, the black SUV rushed out towards Long Island like lightning. Chapter 192 Standard American Stop. On the highway leading to Long Island, a dark SUV was speeding through the traffic. Watching the SUV overtake in all kinds of incredible angles and ways, Ryder swallowed silently and carefully tightened his seatbelt. Selectively ignoring Ryder's little movements, Roan stepped on the accelerator to the bottom. Then, Roan suddenly thought of something, looked at the traffic lights and the congestion on the road, and calculated the distance between the company and Long Island Airport. After a few seconds of hesitation, he pressed the communicator and said loudly, "Mona, I need your help." "What help?" "You and William should check the private airport and the cameras on the roads leading to the airport immediately." Roan explained loudly, "Leilani should not have arrived at the airport yet. I need to know where she is now." Judging from the congestion on the roads in Long Island and Queens, Leilani Keller is either stuck on the road or taking a detour. Judging from the other party's urgency, the other party is likely to have chosen a detour. Now, as long as he knew the route that Leilani took, Luo An would be able to quickly block the other party. Hearing this, Ryder and the co-pilot was shocked. He didn't expect Luo An to have such a talent for multitasking. "No problem." As soon as the voice fell, Mona's response and the crackling sound of the computer keyboard came from the communicator. Soon, the keyboard sound stopped, and Mona said loudly, "You guessed right, Roan. Leilani Keller hasn't arrived at the airport yet. Not only that, we didn't see any trace of Leilani Keller on the roads outside the airport." Seeing that the road ahead was crowded again, Roan turned the steering wheel and drove the SUV to another road, and continued to ask, "Where is Leilani Keller now?" Taking the document handed over by William, Mona on the other side of the communicator smiled. "Leilani Keller's car is the latest Porsche, which is also equipped with global positioning function." Entering the model, license plate, inventory record and other information of the car into the computer, Mona's 10 fingers flew on the keyboard and soon located the other party, and then answered loudly, "The other party's car is now on the northernmost side of Central Park Avenue, heading due west. It seems that he is not going to Long Island Private Airport." "What?" After getting the other party's exact location, Roan frowned slightly, but still quickly drove the SUV to turn around and rushed out. Why didn't the other party go to the airport? This question flashed through his mind. Luo An thought for a few seconds and continued, "Check the call records of Leilani Keller's mobile phone to see if it was an employee of the cosmetics company who told Leilani about our arrival. If so, send someone to catch him back immediately. He is not an employee of that company." Mona on the other side of the communicator said that she had just checked Leilani's call records. The person who called Leilani not long ago was a phone number she had never seen before. "I have seen that phone number." Just as Mona was about to check the location of the other party, based on the phone number to see if she could find the other party's identity through surveillance, William in the office suddenly shouted, "A few hours before Tris and Lil were killed by Rosslyn, and after we successfully arrested Rosslyn, that phone number had contact with Canis's men." Mona was slightly stunned and didn't understand who the other party was. Fouquet. Roan and the SUV reacted quickly, cursed under his breath and immediately explained, "The other party is the sniper. Holly St." Hearing this, Mona also understood. Her pupils shrank, and she said in shock, "The sniper received instructions to kill Leilani to silence her." "That's right." Roan nodded heavily, thought for a while, and asked again, "Is there an airport in the direction that Leilani Keller is heading now? If the killer can make Leilani turn around and leave the private airport, he must have a reason to convince Leilani, such as a new route to leave New York." Leilani is now driving north on the Greenston Highway. Hearing Roan's question, Mona quickly tapped the keyboard and soon made a new discovery on the map. There is a dock at the end of that road. Leilani is likely to escape by boat. No, it should be said that the killer intends to kill Leilani at the dock to silence her. Roan snorted coldly, stepped on the accelerator to the bottom again, and said loudly, "Call the SWAT team for support immediately and ask them to block the entire perimeter of the dock for me." The agent of the number 5 investigation team nodded loudly, "No problem." Black lightning sped on the Greenston Highway. Roan and Rhea arrived at the location where Leilani Keller's Porsche was just now in just over 10 minutes. 500 meters west of 134th Street. Turn right at the 4th intersection ahead. In the office area of the number 5 investigation team, William and other agents stared at the computer screen closely. There were two flashing bright spots, one black and one red. Mona was remotely controlling Roan to hunt Leilani killer. Good. Listening to Mona's remote control, Roan turned the steering wheel and drove the SUV quickly into another road, then asked, "How far is the nearest SWAT team from us?" "On the road. Very close. About 3 miles northwest of you." Roan nodded, and just as he was about to say something, Ryder on the co-pilot suddenly raised his finger and pointed forward, saying loudly, "See that Porsche? It's right there." Good. Following the direction of Ryder's finger, Roan also saw the white car, so he immediately drove the SUV over. Seeing the aggressive SUV, the white Porsche was obviously a little panicked, and the speed suddenly increased. Seeing that the other party was getting closer and closer to the dock, Roan did not hesitate, and directly took out the Glock 18, aimed at the other party's left rear wheel, and pulled the trigger. Bang, bang, bang. A total of 3 bullets were fired from the muzzle, 2 of which hit the Porsche tire perfectly. After checking the equipment, Ryder grinned. "Great job, Roan." Roan's mouth curled up slightly, seeing that the other party's tire was broken, but he still had no intention of stopping. He immediately stepped on the accelerator and drove the SUV into the left rear of the Porsche, then twisted the steering wheel vigorously. Bang! The Porsche immediately lost its balance after being hit, and with the SUV's force in the opposite direction, the Porsche was directly across the road. Standard American interception. The next second, Roan and Ryder immediately opened the car door, holding the Glock 18 and quickly approaching the Porsche in a vigilant posture. "Don't move. Put your hands up." As soon as the two finished speaking, the driver's door of the Porsche was opened, and a white man in a suit suddenly jumped out with a gun. Bang, bang, bang. Ryder, who was closest to the driver's seat, did not hesitate, and immediately aimed at the other party's chest, and pulled the trigger. At the same time, Roan also found Leilani Keller, who was trying to escape in the passenger seat. Seeing Ryder easily deal with the bodyguard, Roan immediately walked towards Leilani, grabbed her by the back of the neck, lifted her up, and handcuffed her hands behind her back. Damn FBI. Feeling the cold handcuffs on her wrists, Leilani Keller cursed with a ferocious face, "Son of..." But before she could finish her words, Roan raised his eyebrows and pulled her to the ground with force. The next second, a bullet crater suddenly appeared where Leilani had just stood. Leilani saw this and screamed in fear. Roan raised his head and looked towards the building not far away, with the corners of his mouth slightly raised. "I found you, Mr. Sniper." Chapter 193. 5 Shocking Bombs. Bang. Hearing the iconic sound of the sniper rifle, Ryder subconsciously bent down to look for obstacles, and then suddenly found that Roan was on that side. His face suddenly changed, and he hurriedly moved there, asking loudly, "Roan, how are you?" "I'm fine." The full-blooded voice came into his ears, and Ryder just breathed a sigh of relief. Before he could react, an old woman with handcuffs suddenly fell into his arms from the front of the car. Looking at Leilani Keller screaming loudly in his arms, Ryder's mouth twitched and asked again, "Roan, what should we do next?" "You keep an eye on the suspect here, and let the SWAT team rush here as quickly as possible to completely block this area." Roan, who was hiding behind another car, checked his equipment, and a cold light flashed in his eyes. "I'll go deal with that sniper." "What?" Hearing the previous words, Ryder nodded very solemnly, but the following words made him stunned. Just as he stood up and prepared to say something, Roan's figure had completely disappeared. Bang, bang, bang. On the other side, Roan kept firing at the sniper's hiding place to suppress him, while rushing into the building at a very fast speed. Just now, when Roan crashed the Porsche and opened the door to get out of the car, he carefully observed the surroundings at the fastest speed. Because this is the dock, there are not many places suitable for snipers to hide. Roan quickly found several locations and calculated in advance where the bullets would be fired from those locations. The moment he caught Leilani Keller, the anxious feeling of being on fire came again, and Roan knew that his guess was right. The sniper really wanted to silence him. Pulling Leilani Keller to the ground, Roan looked at the bullet marks on the ground and quickly determined the opponent's position. At the same time, in a room in the high-rise building, a middle-aged white man with a short haircut and full muscles stood by the wall to avoid bullets. His face was extremely ugly. "Shit, how did that guy find me? Twice already." As a killer who has been wandering in the underground world for many years, the white man with a short haircut who is good at using sniper rifles has not failed many times. But this time, he not only failed twice, but the reason for the failure was the same person. Suppressing the anger in his heart, the killer habit he has developed over the years still made the white man with a short haircut quickly pack up the sniper rifle, erase the traces, and prepare to leave here quickly. A very handsome FBI agent. Before leaving, the white man with a short haircut kept flashing Luo An's face in his mind. "I remember you." Turning around and walking quickly towards the exit route he had prepared in advance, the white man with a short haircut's eyes were full of coldness. The white man with a short haircut planned to leave here first. Judging from his experience, this area will be blocked soon. On the other hand, after avoiding the punishment for the failed Manuscript 13 mission, the white man with a short haircut also planned to find an opportunity to completely kill the FBI, even if no one paid him this time. On the other side, Luo An quickly checked the internal structure of the building, judged others by himself, and looked at the problem from the perspective of a killer, and soon found a suitable escape route. Walking quickly towards one of the staircases, Luo An heard hurried footsteps. As soon as he arrived there, without hesitation, Luo An took out 2 stun grenades and threw them over. Seeing the 2 foreign objects suddenly appearing in front of him, the white man with the crew cut widened his eyes instantly. Shit. Although he didn't know how the other party found this road, the experience of struggling on the line of life and death for many years still made the crew cut make the best response. He directly blocked the weapon box in front of himself. Bang, bang. Bright fire and deafening explosions suddenly sounded, and the white man with the crew cut was thrown to the ground. At %. He cursed a swear word from an unknown country. The next second, the white man with the crew cut endured the discomfort from all parts of his body and climbed up on the spot. He immediately took out his pistol and pulled the trigger in the direction of the stun grenade. Bang, bang, bang. Using bullets to suppress the other party, the expression on the face of the white man with the crew cut was not panicked at all. He had encountered this situation before, but in the end he still survived. Not only that, he also accumulated a lot of experience from those experiences. The white man with the short hair believed that he could also get rid of the opponent this time and leave smoothly. But Luo An, who was on the other side of the wall, took out 3 stun grenades again without hurry. Gurgle. Seeing the new foreign object on the ground, the expression on the white man's face finally couldn't be held back, and he shouted angrily, "Son of." Before he finished speaking, the familiar explosion sounded again. Bang, bang, bang. The flames broke through the restrictions and surged out. This time, the white man with the short hair, who was very close to the stun grenade, felt a burst of hot air rushing towards him, followed by severe pain. The next second, his body flew into the air on the spot and was caught by countless cement debris and shockwaves and hit the shaking wall next to him heavily. The white man with the short hair lying in the cement debris felt a buzzing in his ears, and the world in front of him seemed to shake. TSK, TSK, TSK. Luo An walked out from behind the wall in a vigilant posture. Seeing the white man with the short hair with tattered clothes and blood all over his body, he kicked the weapon on the ground without expression. The moment he saw Luo An's face clearly, the white man with a short haircut slowly took out the 3rd gun from his right hand, and his eyes were red with anger. Damn FBI. The white man with a short haircut didn't know Luo An's name, but it didn't stop him from cursing. "It's me, what's wrong?" Luo An laughed and put his left hand into his pocket, apparently intending to take out his cell phone to call an ambulance. Seeing this, the white man with a short haircut looked disdainful and then immediately took out the 3rd pistol. This is one of the white man's trump cards, and it is also an old friend who has saved his life many times. The white man with a short haircut believes that this time is no exception. Bang. The next second, a gunshot rang out. The white man with a short haircut was stunned. "I don't think I have fired yet." Then, a splitting headache, numbness in hands and feet, and a feeling of losing control of limbs came into his mind. Feeling the blood slowly flowing down his forehead, the white man with a short haircut realized that he was shot. Then, an indescribable sleepiness surged into his heart. Looking at the body of the white man with a buzz cut, Luo An put away the Glock 18 in his right hand and sneered, "Do you really think I didn't see your little move? There is no killer in the world who doesn't have a trump card, not to mention the white man with a buzz cut who has been in the killer business for decades. Luo An has been on guard against him. If the white man with a buzz cut is sent to prison, the judge will definitely sentence him to death or life imprisonment. But Luo An knows that before he dies, the other party will definitely use hidden funds to buy his life or the lives of the agents of the number 5 investigation team in the underground world. Killers are the most vengeful people in the world. What's more, there are countless lives in the hands of the white man with a buzz cut. After pressing the communicator, Luo An patted the dust on his body and said in a calm voice, "This is Luo An. Leilani Keller has been successfully arrested, and the sniper has been successfully solved. Oh, well done, Luo An. You are so awesome." As Luo An's voice fell, cheers from the agents came from the communicator. Back at investigation team number 5, the detectives applauded and cheered for Luo An again. Then, before Luo An sat down, Mona patted him on the shoulder, pointed to the team leader's office, and said with a strange look, "Luo An, Augustus wants to see you." Chapter 194 Internal Revenue Service Criminal Investigation, IRSCI. Hearing that Augustus wanted to talk to him about something, and seeing the strange look on Mona's face, Roan's expression froze slightly. He thought of the SUV that he had just used the American interception method and accidentally damaged the front of the car. At this moment, Lassie returned to the 5th investigation team. Roan's eyes lit up and asked, "How is it, Lassie? Did you catch the bank clerk?" "Of course." Lassie took a big sip of coffee and explained with a smile, "That guy is very timid. I scared him a little and he confessed everything. That guy is an informant bought by Leilani Keller. He doesn't have anything to do normally, but as long as he finds someone investigating the financial situation of the cosmetics company, that guy will immediately call Leilani Keller." The detective suddenly realized, and Roan nodded, understanding the reason why Leilani Keller ran away in fear before. After thinking for a while, Luo An turned his head and looked at everyone and said, "Everyone, we must learn from this experience and lessons. In the future, if there are similar activities, we must always monitor the communication between the target person and the people around him." "That's right. You are right." Upon hearing this, all the detectives nodded seriously, and William and other technicians patted their chests and promised that they would pay more attention to these aspects in the future. Luo An nodded with satisfaction, then took the investigation materials from Lassie's hand and walked into the team leader's office leisurely. "Hello, sir." In addition to Augustus, there was also a middle-aged white man in a grey, striped suit who entered the team leader's office. Nodding and greeting the other party, Luo An handed the folder to Augustus and then said with a smile, "Sir, the 2 suspects have been arrested, and the guy who leaked the information has been dealt with. Today's operation was a complete success." Taking the file, looking at the innocent smile on Luo An's face, as if he had no idea what was going on, Augustus's mouth twitched. The SUV in the garage was still waiting for August to pay for repairs. He really didn't know how expensive it was until he ran the household. However, August quickly put the matter behind him. Anyway, the condition of the SUV was not very serious, and the activity funds of the number 5 investigation team could afford the money. "This is our number 5 investigation team's senior agent, Roan Greenwood." Putting the folder on the table, August smiled and introduced to both parties, "This is the senior investigation team leader from the Criminal Investigation Division of the Internal Revenue Service, IRS. Hello, Agent Roan." The plain-looking middle-aged white man smiled and extended his hand to Roan. "Just call me Elmer." "Hello, Chief Elmer." Upon learning of Elmer's identity, Roan was in awe and hurriedly extended his hand to shake hands with the other party. The Criminal Investigation Division of the Internal Revenue Service, or ICI, is a terrifying department that makes countless federal citizens turn pale. The reason for the terror is simple. Ordinary investigators in the IRS are responsible for managing illegal acts such as tax evasion, while the Criminal Investigation Division is responsible for financial crimes. In the army of tax evaders in the federal territory, in addition to those ordinary wealthy people, there are also a bunch of wealthy people, big companies and big conglomerates. The main target of the Criminal Investigation Division of the Internal Revenue Service is these people. According to the federal constitution, the federal government has the power to levy taxes on all sources of income of federal citizens. This all sources includes not only ordinary legal income, but also a lot of illegal acts such as smuggling, money laundering, robbery, and drug trafficking. However, talents who often work in these blue ocean industries are often not very motivated to pay taxes. Therefore, the Criminal Investigation Division of the Internal Revenue Service often chooses to use physical means to collect taxes. In the process of using physical means, weapons are not mentioned. In specific actions, the agents of the Criminal Investigation Division of the Internal Revenue Service can directly break into the door and arrest people without permission, ignore Miranda warnings, ignore confidentiality laws, and have the right to call on information and data from all other law enforcement departments. Suspects have no right to remain silent, etc. The most outrageous thing is that the department can arrest people first and then search for evidence. Thinking of this, Luo An looked at Augustus calmly. He didn't expect that the other party could pull the head of this department to deal with Canis' money laundering case. But it's good this way. Before, Roan was still thinking about how likely it was that Canis, as a rich man, would get himself out of this case. But now Roan is no longer worried. Being targeted by the ICI, Canis' happy life has entered a countdown. I've heard of you, Roan. Since you joined the number 5 investigation team, the case-solving rate of this search team has begun to rise sharply. Retracting his hand, Elmer looked Roan up and down carefully, with admiration in his eyes, and asked with a smile, "How about it? Are you interested in working for me?" Hearing this, Roan hadn't responded yet. Augustus suddenly stood up with his eyes wide open. "Hey, Elmer, I've already given you a gift today. Don't go too far." When Augustus and Elmer were young, they worked together in a department in New York for a long time, and the two were very familiar with each other. To be honest, Augustus, I feel that a talent like Roan is a bit of a waste here. Elmer's smile remained unchanged. No leader doesn't like talents, especially a leader like him who competes with those rich people every day. Elmer had briefly checked Roan's information before coming here, and then he fell in love with this smart FBI senior agent. For Elmer, wisdom is more important than good skills, not to mention that Roan solved so many cases in a short time. So Elmer selectively ignored Augustus's dissatisfaction and said to Roan with a smile, "If you come to me, I can guarantee that your level will not change and you will still be a senior agent. This is quite sincere. Thank you for your appreciation, sir." Looking at Augustus standing next to him, Roan smiled and said, "But I prefer solving cases. The team leader and the team supervisor take good care of me, and the work and life of the FBI are more suitable for me." Roan would not jump to the Criminal Investigation Division of the Eyes on a whim. The work there is truly high turnover and high efficiency. Their real goal is to file and close cases as quickly as possible and collect tax revenue. Moreover, among the many law enforcement agencies in the federal government, ICE employees have the greatest work pressure and the highest absorption rate and crime rate. Luo An's goal in life is to solve cases, make money and enjoy life, not to stage 996 workplace war. Ha ha ha. Augustus laughed with satisfaction when he heard this, walked out from behind the desk, and patted Elmer's shoulder triumphantly. Okay. Elmer was not angry, even though he was rejected. He kept smiling and took out a business card from his pocket and handed it to Roan. "Take it. If you change your mind in the future, you can call this number." After that, Elmer patted Roan on the shoulder, then took a folder and left the team leader's office. Before leaving, he turned back and added, "By the way, Augustus, remember to send me all the information about the Canis money laundering case." "No problem." Augustus waved his hand and agreed. He turned around and sat back in his chair. He threw the sub-repair documents aside, then handed the other 2 folders to Roan and said with a smile, "Open them and take a look." Chapter 195 The Essence of FBI and CIA. Because the Chief Financial Officer kidnapping case has not been completely solved, and the ICE needs to be involved in the follow-up, although the number 5 investigation team solved the case and caught the murderer, the bonus and other money have not been paid for the time being. However, the Park River Mail Corp's case that the Financial Crimes Investigation Division intervened in was finally handled today. There are 2 files One is the bonus that the number 5 investigation team received after the Park River male corpse case was handled, and the certificate that Luo An's bonus doubled. The other is the Financial Crimes Investigation Division subsequent thanks. A large amount of funds has been added to the activity funds of the number 5 investigation team, and Luo An's account has also appeared with $390,000 to be received. Luo An and Augustus in the office looked at each other and grinned. Oh, right. The two laughed for a while, and Augustus suddenly thought of something, slapped his head and said, "The identity of the white killer with a crew cut who was captured and killed by you today has been found out. His name is Orson Monroe. He is 46 years old, and he is a veteran killer in the underground world. In addition to the FBI, the CIA and NSA also have rewards for his crimes, which add up to about $470,000. Remember to claim it later." Luo An's eyes lit up, and he nodded heavily. "Okay, thank you, sir. No need to thank me. You solved the problem, and these are naturally what you deserve." Augustus waved his hand, then turned on the computer beside him, with a somewhat annoyed expression on his face, and said, "In fact, Orson Monroe is also carrying a bounty from the underground world, but you can't get this money." Underground world? Luo An was slightly stunned when he heard this, and hurriedly looked at Augustus's computer, and found that there was an encrypted website with black and red colors on the screen, and the content inside was exactly the bounty for Orson Monroe. The conditions for receiving this reward are somewhat harsh. That is, the murderer must hand over the head of Orson Monroe to the other party. It is unknown what deep hatred the other party has with Orson Monroe. However, because Orson Monroe is now dead, this reward has become gray. Luo An looked at the harsh requirements for receiving the reward and looked away, and asked with a serious face, "Sir, what's the matter with this website?" Seeing this website, Luo An's mind suddenly emerged with a suit man who killed 5 movies because of a dog. Then he thought of the Continental Hotel. However, Luo An has been in New York for so long, and he has never seen or heard of the name of the Continental Hotel. He has been to the building and the movie, but it is just an ordinary hotel, and there are often movie crews shooting there. Hearing Luo An's question and the Continental Hotel he mentioned, Augustus shook his head and said that he had never heard of this organization in the Federation, and there is no well-known underground organization in the world with this name. Then Augustus pointed to the website on the computer and explained, this website was established by a gang in South America. According to Augustus, when this killer website was just established, the FBI and CIA discovered it and sent a large number of agents to register accounts to monitor the other party. There was even one time when the gang was almost attacked by the enemy, and it was a CIA group who helped to maintain the website to prevent the website from closing down. So now there are more FBI and CIA people on this website than real killers. Not only that, Augustus took a sip of coffee and continued to show several other underground websites. There are a large number of FBI agents and CIA agents stationed in these websites. This group of people also use these websites to disguise their identities and solve many cases. Holding the folder, Luo An left the team leader's office speechlessly. Sure enough, phishing enforcement is the essence of FBI and CIA law enforcement. How is it, Roan? Seeing Roan walk out of the team leader's office, Mona covered her mouth and smiled and asked, "Did Augustus criticize you for crashing the SUV? How is that possible?" Roan smiled slightly. With so much money added to the activity funds of the number 5 investigation team, Augustus was so happy that his back teeth showed. However, Augustus still reminded Roan to be more careful next time. Roan also smiled and nodded and agreed, saying that he would not do it next time. Throwing this week's bonus payment certificate to Mona, before Roan sat down in his chair, happy screams resounded throughout the office area of the number 5 investigation team. Immediately afterwards, the applause and cheers of the agents of the number 5 investigation team for Roan. The agents quarreled and played for a while, and returned to their posts to deal with the follow-up of the case. Roan sat in his chair and started spinning around. This is another reason why Roan refused to go to the eyes. He can fish openly in the number 5 investigation team. Looking at the computer in front of him, Roan's eyes were dull and his mind was empty. He silently calculated his accumulation and gains during this period. After spending $1.2 million to buy Apple stock, Roan still had $220,000 left. The 3 doubled bonuses for the male corpse case, the deep pit case and the female judge case added up to $9,000. The Long Island government's reward of $200,000. The bearded 3 people's $60,000. And Salvatore Cristo's $39,000 and Orson Monroe's $470,000. Adding the weekly salary, Roan found that his gains during this period were about $1.35 million. Writing and drawing on the paper, Roan frowned and thought, will I buy Apple stock next? Should I change to another one? But which one should I change to? Continue to struggle. JPG. The clock at the front of the office area soon reached the time to get off work. As usual, Ryder and other agents went home. Mona stayed in the investigation team, and Lassie drove straight to the hotel. Luo An bought some fruits and flowers again, and went to the hospital to visit Vereen's to keep in touch. Vereen's wounds had recovered well. When Luo An brought things to the hospital, she was sitting in a wheelchair, looking at the scenery in the distance through the window of the ward. Seeing Luo An, Vereen's showed a faint smile on her face. After a few simple greetings, she shifted the topic to the case. This is the story of the case, sir. After describing the general situation of the money laundering case, Luo An handed her a peeled fruit and said with a smile, the follow-up arrest of Canis was handed over to the IS people by team leader Augustus. Yeah. After taking the fruit, Vereen's nodded softly, with a satisfied look on her face. The two continued to chat for a while, and when the nurse came to indicate that it was time for the injection, Luo An got up and left the ward. After brushing up the favorability, Luo An drove back to his small apartment in Greenwich. The next day, in the office of the number 5 investigation team, all the agents were busy with their own things. Luo An was still sitting in a chair slacking off, while checking the system page in his mind. From last Wednesday to Sunday, because Luo An did nothing, the system's evaluation of him was basically passing, and the treasure chests that were opened were all physical potions and strength potions. On Monday, Luo An's performance was evaluated as good by the system, and the treasure chest opened another bottle of swiftness potions that had been used up before. Yesterday, the case was solved, and the system gave Luo An an evaluation of excellent. In addition to the physical potions and strength potions, there were also 2 bottles of hemostatic potions. After Luo An finished his breakfast, he drank a bottle of physical potions in the lounge to moisten his throat. Just as he returned to his seat, Augustus suddenly pushed open the door of the office area and walked in, shouting, Luo An, come to my office. Chapter 196 A Sudden Fire. Hearing Augustus's shout, Luo An, who hadn't even sat down yet, slowly stood up from his chair. Because Augustus didn't shout in front of the office with a folder this time, Luo An was not panicked at all, which meant that this was not a new case. Sure enough, when he entered the team leader's office, Augustus handed him several thick folders. They were not notices or orders, but just the files and reports of the previous cases. Augustus thought that Luo An was idle anyway, so he might as well let him look at the report and check if there were any errors. If there were any, point them out and someone will correct them later. Time to slack off at work is fun, but it's always too little and passes too quickly. Luo An felt that he just turned around in his chair a few times, and the date on the calendar next to him went from Wednesday to the last working day of the week. Friday afternoon. Watching the sun run from east to west again, it was time to get off work today. Luo An sat in his chair and silently checked the system page in front of him. In the light blue system warehouse column, there are now physical potion X2, strength potion X2, antitoxin potion X2, hemostatic potion X4, featherfall potion X1, weakness potion X1, aqualung potion X1, anti-fire potion X1, anti-pain potion X1. Not only that, on Thursday night, because Luo An did nothing during the day, the system gave him a pass evaluation, and then a $50 and a $100 bill were opened in the treasure chest. Looking at Franklin in his hand, Luo An smiled. It seems that his previous guess was right. The system treasure chest will open a few US dollars every half a month. Just as Luo An was sitting in a chair immersed in his own world, Lassie, who had finished her work, suddenly came over. Taking the coffee from Lassie, Luo An was puzzled. "What's wrong? I want to ask you for help." Clinking the coffee cup with Luo An, Lassie's eyes sparkled, and she whispered, "How about going to a bar in Manhattan with me after get off work?" Lassie recently met two beautiful girls who were studying in New York University in that bar, but she hasn't won them over yet. Luo An immediately became interested. "So, you want me to be your wingman?" "No." Lassie shook her head. She had already figured out the interests of the two girls. One of them didn't mind playing games with the same sex, while the other was very resistant to this. "The girl named Vivian who only likes handsome guys is left to you. I believe your face can definitely conquer her." Lassie came close to Luo An, rubbing her hands, and whispered, "The other one is left to me. We'll each have one, okay?" Luo An raised his eyebrows. Lassie was an old hand in flirting, and there were not many girls that she could think about so much. So was the other person's figure too attractive, or was her face too beautiful? "Okay, please say something." Luo An didn't answer. Lassie sat on the chair and scratched her head, which made her very anxious. "I want to see the photo first." Thinking of Lassie's unethical behavior before, Luo An planned to let her take out the other party's photo first, and then decide whether to agree or not. Before he could finish his words, Augustus suddenly pushed open the door of the office area. Seeing the folder in Augustus's hand and the gloomy look on Daho's face, Luo An and Lassie's hearts skipped a beat. "Everyone. A new case." Hearing Augustus' words, and looking at the clock at the front of the office area, which only had 10 minutes left before the end of get off work, Luo An immediately raised his hand to cover his forehead with a speechless face. The anxious expression on Lassie's face also collapsed instantly. Just 20 minutes ago, a fire suddenly broke out in the Brooklyn District Government Building. Without a chance to see the various expressions on everyone's faces, Augustus said loudly with a solemn face, "Although the fire was urgently extinguished by the FDNY, New York Fire Department, it still burned a congressman and several students from Alfred University in New York to death." Knowing that so many people died in this fire, the detectives of the number 5 investigation team immediately looked serious. Handing the folder to William, Augustus continued, "Because one of the dead was a congressman, the NYPD called us urgently, and they need the help of the FBI. Roan stood up. "Lassie and I will go to the scene to check the situation now." "Good." Augustus nodded. "Be careful and don't lose contact. Oh, by the way, this is temporary overtime today." Hearing Augustus's last sentence, Roan smiled slightly, which meant that there would be overtime pay later. Pulling Lassie, who had not yet reacted, into the equipment warehouse, the two immediately left the number 5 investigation team a moment later. The sub with the damaged front end had not been repaired yet, so Luo An was driving another sub from the number 5 investigation team this time. On the passenger seat, Lassie saw the sub under her speeding through the traffic on the road. She silently fastened her seatbelt and swallowed her saliva, saying, "Luo An, can you go a little slower? This is the only car left for our number 5 investigation team. If this car is damaged again, they may have to borrow cars from other investigation teams to investigate the case next. Trust my driving skills, Lassie." Luo An smiled slightly and silently stepped on the accelerator to the bottom. Lassie snorted and then suddenly thought of something, took out her mobile phone from her pocket and started typing. Turning the steering wheel to overtake a car, Luo An turned his head and smiled. "Are you sending messages to the two girls? Let's meet at another time." "No." A trace of worry flashed in Lassie's eyes, and she shook her head and said, "Remember what I said before, that the two girls were college students? The university they attended was Alfred University." "What?" Luo An was a little surprised, and then hurriedly asked, "Are they in the government building?" "No." Seeing the new text message on her mobile phone, Lassie let out a long breath, turned her head and smiled. The two of them were busy working part-time in the bar to make money, so they were lucky not to encounter this fire. God always favors hard-working people. Luo An casually said a piece of chicken soup that he didn't know where he heard from, and then stepped on the accelerator again to overtake a car. Soon, the two arrived at the government building in Brooklyn. At this time, the square in front of the government building was crowded with people, not only the families of the victims, passers-by who were joining in the fun, a large number of reporters reporting the news live, and the NYPD who maintained order at the scene. After getting off the SUV and glancing at the charred government building not far away, Roan and Lassie quickly walked into the cordon. "Hello, detective. I'm Agent Roan from the FBI. Just call me Bailey." Seeing the gold badge in Roan's hand, a NYPD detective immediately came up. After the two sides shook hands, Detective Bailey introduced directly, a congressman and 4 college students died at the scene, and more than 40 people were injured due to smoke inhalation. The injured have been sent to the hospital for treatment. Following Detective Bailey into the government building, Roan looked around and asked, "Are there any witnesses to the fire?" "I don't know. We are still looking." The 3 of them walked quickly into the building. Bailey took Roan and Lassie to the door of a charred room, pointed inside, with an extremely ugly expression on his face. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 197. Arson Case of Members of Parliament and Students. The room beside the 2 of them was a small conference room, but Lassie was in no mood to check the structure of the conference room at this time, because the people from the trace examination department had not arrived yet, and the bodies of the 5 victims were still in the room. So when Lassie turned her head, she smelled an indescribable smell of burnt barbecue. Fouquet. Lassie quickly covered her nose. Her face was very ugly. "Go and retrieve the surveillance of this building first." Luo An didn't react much, casually arranged Lassie's work, then took out gloves from his pocket and put them on, and slowly walked into the room that was still a little warm. The smell of barbecue in the room was even stronger. Seeing that Luo An's expression did not change at all, Detective Bailey and several NYPD outside were immediately full of admiration. First carefully check the door of the room, then Luo An walked to the 5 bodies in the room and began to carefully check their conditions. There were some fragments under the feet of 2 of the bodies. Luo An took a flashlight and shone them, and his brows frowned immediately. Not long after, the trace inspection agents who drove slower finally arrived, and Lassie came back. After adjusting the surveillance in the corridor of the building has not been installed yet. I only found the surveillance outside the building. Holding a laptop in her arms, Lassie showed the screen to Luo An and said, 5 minutes before the alarm was triggered, only this guy left the back door of the building. In the surveillance video, there was a guy wearing a grey suit and a black and blue hat, running away from the building in a hurry. Male, very thin. After watching the video, Luo An quickly concluded, the left hand has been tightly covering the right hand, which means that his right hand is likely injured, or it is possible that there is the target object he finally got there. That's right. Lassie nodded, and then asked, how is it, Luo An, what did you find here? Luo An heard this, and handed her the fragments he had just found under the body. This is. After taking the fragments, Lassie looked at them carefully and said uncertainly, fragments of bottles. To be precise, they are fragments of homemade Molotov cocktails. He loudly signaled the detectives of the trace examination department to take all the fragments on the ground back for examination. Luo An looked around and said with his chin on his hand, judging from the situation at the scene, the congressman should have been chatting with 4 college students before the crime. Then, the door was suddenly opened, and a Molotov cocktail was thrown into the room by the murderer. The room is not big, and is relatively closed. In addition, the fire started burning from the door and the middle of the room, so the congressman and several students soon lay in the flames. Not only that, the door of the room was locked, and there were traces of Molotov cocktail fragments in the corridor. Even if one of them opened the door and ran out of the meeting room, he would be burned to death by the flames of the Molotov cocktails in the corridor. After listening to Luo An's description, Detective Bailey's eyes flashed with surprise, and Lassie's face changed slightly. How much hatred does the murderer have for these 5 victims? Go find the staff at the government building. Patting Lassie on the shoulder, Roan took off his gloves and walked out of the room, saying, wait a minute, make a list of the people who can enter this conference room. Okay. Lassie nodded and hurriedly followed with the computer. The next day, Investigation Team 5. I'm sorry, detectives, the impact of this case is too great. The mayor called to inquire about the situation, so we have to work overtime on Saturday. But don't worry, we will definitely not forget to deposit the overtime pay into your bank account later. Augustus shouted loudly with his belly bulging at the front of the office area. After William distributed the folder to everyone, he turned his eyes to Mona and said, "Introduce the information of these 5 victims." Okay. Mona nodded, tapped the keyboard a few times, looked at the computer screen and introduced loudly, 4 college students, 2 men and 2 women, named Vinny, Nicole, Kiana and Vinina, all from the Alfred University School of Business in New York, and they are still 6 months away from graduation. Another congressman victim is named Emmanuel Bain, 56 years old, a Republican, and this is his first year to get a seat in the New York City Council. Wow. As we all know, New York has always been the Democratic Party's stronghold, with 2.8 million Democrats and only 500,000 Republicans. In the New York City Council, Democrats also occupy 51 seats, and Republicans only 3 seats. Thinking of this, Rohn said, "So, we can temporarily determine that the murderer's target is Congressman Emmanuel Bain." Rohn determined the next main direction of the investigation. Augustus did not object, and continued to ask, "Mona, can you find out who Emmanuel's enemies are?" "That's too easy." Mona smiled slightly, tapping on the keyboard with her 10 fingers, and soon pulled out Emmanuel's political inclinations and propaganda content. Our Congressman Emmanuel calls himself the guardian of traditional federal values. So he opposes feminism, abortion, and gun bans, supports white supremacy and white nationalism, supports church schools, and advocates market freedom. After listening to Mona's introduction, except for Rohn, all the agents of the number 5 investigation team rolled their eyes. Augustus patted his belly and nodded. Very good. It seems that more than half of the people in New York are his enemies. After a few seconds of silence, Augustus turned his gaze to Rohn on the side. Seeing this, Luo An did not hesitate, and immediately asked loudly, "Have the test results of the fragments handed over to the trace examination department last night come out?" Riyad nodded hurriedly and replied, "The results are out. Your judgment is correct. Those things are indeed homemade simple Molotov cocktails, and the liquid used is all gasoline. But unfortunately, the trace examination department did not find fingerprints and DNA on those fragments, so it is impossible to find the identity of the murderer in the internal database." Luo An's expression did not change, and he continued to ask, "Lassie, what is the situation with the list you mentioned last night and Emmanuel's recent schedule?" "No problems were found." Lassie handed Luo An the list of people who could enter the conference room, and then said, "Yesterday Emmanuel first gave a speech in the square in Brooklyn, then went to several communities to comfort the people, and finally returned to the government building to be interviewed by the 4 college students." Luo An nodded, looked at the list of people carefully for a while, then looked up, and said to the detectives, "Everyone, we need to carefully check the surveillance in the area near the Brooklyn government building next, and we must know where the man in the gray suit went after leaving the building. In addition, the interpersonal relationships, emotional status, and financial situation of the 4 college students also need to be carefully investigated." "No problem." Although the work content is a bit much and a bit complicated, William and several technical agents nodded loudly and agreed. Luo An nodded with satisfaction, turned to look at Lassie and Riyad, and said, "Next, you will visit the family of Congressman Emmanuel, as well as the relatives and friends of the 4 college students, to see if you can find useful clues from them." "Okay." Riyad and Lassie agreed, threw down the folder, and turned to walk into the equipment warehouse. Seeing this, Mona on the side, looked up and asked, "What do we do next?" "Let's go find him." Handing the list in his hand to Mona, Luo An pointed to a name on it. "Who is this?" Except for the 4 college students, he was the last person Congressman Emmanuel saw before his death. Chapter 198, Scolding the Congressman Just for Money. "I'm indeed the last person to have seen Congressman Emmanuel." In a room in the Brooklyn District Government Building, a middle-aged white man in a suit and tie nodded and replied, "After learning the purpose of Rohn and Mona's visit, me and several colleagues helped organize Congressman Emmanuel's speech in the square yesterday. Thank you for your cooperation, Mr. Dominic. Putting the FBI's golden badge back into his pocket, Roan sat opposite Dominic and asked, as far as I know, you are the security consultant of Congressman Emanuel's team. Do you have any suspects about yesterday's tragedy? Behind each congressman of the Federation is a team that is not only responsible for the life and finances of the congressman, but also responsible for protecting the personal safety and external image of the congressman. This time Emanuel was burned to death by a Molotov cocktail. As the congressman's security consultant, Dominic will definitely have a hard time in the future. So when he heard Roan's question, he immediately rummaged through his desk, then handed a pile of information to Mona next to him, with a serious face. These are the death threats we received against Congressman Emanuel before the speech started yesterday. There are a total of 54. Looking at the pile of death threat messages in his arms, Mona's mouth twitched, and Roan's eyelids twitched, and asked, with so many death threats, why did you agree to Emanuel's schedule yesterday? Because this was a strong request from Congressman Emanuel. Dominic was full of regret, and said that he was just a consultant. If his employer, Congressman Emanuel, insisted on doing something, it would be difficult for them to stop him. Okay. He pulled out a piece of paper and took a look and found that it was all about the identity information of certain people. After thinking for a while, Roan continued, by the way, make a list of all the political organizations that Emmanuel has recently contacted, whether friendly or hostile, and then give me a copy of their specific information. No problem. More than an hour later, Roan and Mona put 2 large cardboard boxes full of documents into the trunk of the SUV. Mona straightened up, wiped the sweat from her forehead, sat in the passenger seat, and turned to ask, Luo An, you collect information about these political organizations. Do you think the murderer comes from those people? Possibly. Starting the SUV and driving out of the parking lot, Luo An pointed to a group of people holding signs in the square not far away, some black, some white, and some brown, but not yellow, and loudly protesting, and replied, look at those people, each of them has anger in their eyes. Any politician's views and words will be labeled, and then amplified and attacked by opponents, let alone an extreme conservative like Emanuel. For these incited people whose minds are full of radical ideas, killing a person is nothing. They are just a group of idealists. Looking through the car window, looking at the protesters in the square holding a lot of signs such as anti-discrimination, cut government spending, death to the president, etc. Mona opened her mouth and didn't know what to say. Glancing at Mona, who was silent and understood but not completely, Roan's expression remained unchanged, but he shook his head deep in his heart, then silently stepped on the accelerator and left. The Federation is a very magical country. A book divides society horizontally, regardless of gender, into property owners and propertyless people, and then the top leaders of the Federation successfully reverse practice this book. They divide society vertically, first into men, women, men who become women, women who become men, and then divide them into blacks, whites, Muslims, minorities, vegetarians, and a lot of other camps. Let them fight each other, and finally the rich and the powerful sit on the high platform, drinking red wine, and smoking cigars to watch the show. This is the root cause of the emergence of political correctness and various booths stacking and fighting more than a decade later. Soon, Roan and Mona arrived at the base of a political organization that Dominic had circled before, which he suspected the most. It is called a base, but it is actually a two-story building. The sign on the doorplate shows that it is a small newspaper office. The day before Congressman Emanuel was burned to death, this newspaper published an article saying Congressman Emanuel should be burned to death on the spot. After parking the car and pushing open the door to enter the newspaper office, Roan and Mona successfully met the owner of the newspaper and the leader of the political organization, after showing their golden badges to identify themselves. A middle-aged black man with natural curly hair, Cody. Roan didn't waste any words and directly explained his purpose. Just call me Cody. After pouring 2 cups of coffee for Roan and Mona, Cody replied with a smile, you are right, my newspaper did publish such an article. No, not just your newspaper. Hearing this, Mona shook her head, put the newspaper on the table, and stared at the other person's face. The author signed at the end of this article is you. Okay, I did write this article. Seeing the coldness in Roan's eyes, Cody was silent for a moment, nodded and admitted this, then spread his hands, but the content in it is just a metaphor. Emmanuel Bain is a rubbish, and opposes racial equality, so as a black man, isn't it normal for me to hate him? At this point, Cody saw that the expressions on Roan and Mona's faces did not change much, and they were still full of seriousness. He cursed in his heart, and then he explained in a low voice, "You too, Emmanuel Bain's death really has nothing to do with me, and I don't know what this matter is about. To be honest, insulting Emmanuel Bain is just to mobilize the masses and create enemies. In this way, I can not only attract their donations, but also increase newspaper sales." Mona frowned when she heard this, but Luo An nodded. Political inclinations are not as important as making money. Looking back at the busy employees behind him, Luo An continued to ask, "Are there any members of your organization who are more inclined to solve problems with violence?" "Indeed, there are, but they all left, because I don't allow them to do so." Cody laughed and said that he was not an idealist. He was very realistic. Shouting slogans and scolding congressmen were simply for making money. Good. Seeing the smile on Cody's face, Luo An also laughed. "So can you give me a copy of the names and information of those who want to provoke conflicts?" "No." Cody shook his head repeatedly, indicating that this was other people's privacy. "Okay, then I'll change the way I ask." Roan's smile became wider and his tone became more amiable. "Give me their information immediately, or I'll apply for a search warrant and seize all the facilities of your newspaper, and then carefully investigate the economic situation of your newspaper." Hearing this, Cody's expression froze. A few minutes later, Roan walked out of the newspaper with a few folders, and Mona followed him silently with a computer. "What's wrong, Mona?" Roan opened the door and let Mona out, then asked with a smile, "Why don't you talk?" Mona sighed and replied, Mona had just started to say something when she felt like her, but was on fire again. Roan's pupils shrank, and he quickly grabbed Mona's arm and pulled her into his arms and quickly hid next to a car. The next second, a grey car sped past on the road, and several large bottles were thrown directly from the car in this direction. Chapter 199 Molotov Cocktail. It's a Molotov cocktail. Seeing the specific appearance of the bottles in the parabola in the air, Luo An's face was very ugly. He hurriedly held Mona and moved quickly in the opposite direction of the car. Bang, 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 boom. The next second, several large bottles fell heavily to the ground, and the orange-red flames rose instantly. In the blink of an eye, the passerby car that Luo An and Mona had just avoided, as well as the newspaper office next to them, were quickly engulfed by the fire. Exclamations and screams were heard instantly in the newspaper office. "Fouquet." Luo An quickly got up from the ground, looked at the back of the car, greeted the family in the car, and then hurriedly turned his eyes to Mona under him. "Are you okay?" "I'm fine." Mona shook her head, felt the heat in the direction of her thigh, and looked back at the place where she had just stood. If Luo An hadn't pulled her into his arms just now, Mona felt that she might have been burned now. All this happened too quickly, and she didn't react at all. Mona turned her head and looked at Luo An with gratitude in her eyes. "I'm glad you're okay." Roan grinned, quickly pulled Mona's hand to pull her up from the ground, and then quickly ran to the SUV not far away. There happened to be a NYPD patrolman on another street not far away. Seeing the flames rising to the sky, he hurriedly drove the police car here. After learning the situation from Mona, the patrolman immediately called nearby colleagues for support. Roan also drove the SUV parked not far away here. "Mona, get in the car." "Okay." As Mona closed the passenger door, the SUV rushed out like an arrow from a string. After briefly describing the appearance of the grey car, Luo An immediately asked, "Where is the other party now?" Mona, who was sitting in the passenger seat, picked up the laptop from the front and quickly tapped the keyboard. She soon found the other party. "Turn right at the intersection ahead. Go straight for 600 meters and turn right at the intersection again." "Okay." Turning the steering wheel, the SUV quickly drove into another road. Before the intersection mentioned in the name, Luo An suddenly discovered something and raised his eyebrows. "The road they took is a one-way street." "Yes." Mona nodded, turned around and wondered, "What are you going to do?" Luo An grinned and stepped on the accelerator to the bottom. No more chasing. Go directly in front of them to intercept them. After that, the SUV quickly drove into another road. After overtaking the cars on the road at several incredible angles, leaving a floor of shocked eyeballs, Luo An successfully led Mona to the end of the one-way street before the grey car. After parking the SUV not far away, Ron and Mona immediately took out their pistols and rushed to the one-way street. Seeing the grey car coming in this direction, they raised their pistols at the same time and aimed at each other, shouting, "Stop! Stop immediately!" There were 3 people in the grey car. The white young man in the passenger seat saw Ron and Mona and was immediately shocked. "Fuke. How did they get in front of us? Who cares?" The white young driver gritted his teeth and not only did not intend to stop the car, but stepped on the accelerator to the bottom, causing the grey car to hit Ron and Mona at a faster speed. Seeing this, Ron and Mona immediately pulled the trigger without hesitation. Mona's main attack was the windshield of the front cab of the grey car, while Ron's target was the left and right tires in front of the grey car. Bang, 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 bang bang bang. After a few gunshots, the windshield of the grey car was shattered but no one was injured, but the 2 front tires were completely scrapped. Mona raised her eyebrows. "Well done, Luo An." The guy in the passenger seat of the grey car was full of fear, and the driver had a hideous look on his face. He tried his best to control the vehicle to move forward in a straight line. However, the tire was scrapped, causing the inside to be exposed and sparks to fly when it was in contact with the ground. The car still drove diagonally to the side without his control. Seeing this, another middle-aged white man in the back seat of the car immediately opened the door and jumped out of the car. After rolling on the ground for a few times, he stood up and ran. Luo An saw the guy's movements and figure clearly, but now the grey car had already hit the 2 of them. Luo An and Mona immediately stood up and jumped to the side of the grey car's forward route. The next second, the grey car hit the wall of a roadside store heavily, directly making a big hole in the wall. Mona, holding a weapon, walked quickly to the passenger seat in a vigilant posture and knocked out the white young man in the passenger seat. But she didn't see the driver and immediately shouted, "Luo An, be careful." "I didn't." Bang, 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 bang. Before Mona finished her words, 4 gunshots rang out from the car, followed by a familiar voice from Ron. "The driver has been dealt with. Keep an eye on these 2. I'll catch the one that ran away." When Mona moved to the other side of the car, she found a white youth lying on the ground with a bullet in each leg and arm, wailing loudly, while Ron's figure had completely disappeared. "Damn it, it's like this again." After kicking the wailing white youth unconscious and handcuffing him, Mona's face was full of worry, and she immediately took out her cell phone and said, "William, this is Mona. Send someone to support immediately. In addition, find out the identities of the 3 people who attacked me and Ron as quickly as possible." On the other side, Ron had already run to the place where the middle-aged white man jumped out of the car and then chased him along the left side of the other side. On the left side was a long alley. In addition to the messy garbage, there were also many small umbrellas filled with unknown white liquid. When Ron entered the alley, the middle-aged white man had almost run 2/3 of the alley. Looking back to check the situation, the middle-aged white man was shocked when he saw Luo An's figure. "Shit. How can this guy be so fast?" After judging the distance between the 2 sides, Luo An was about to raise his Glock 18. At this moment, the middle-aged white man suddenly took out 2 glass bottles from his pocket and threw them towards the road between the 2 of them. Bang, bang. The moment the glass bottles fell to the ground, the orange-red fire instantly burned, blocking Luo An's way forward. Another Molotov cocktail. Luo An's face sank slightly, and the middle-aged white man grinned, then turned around and continued to run forward. It was just that the middle-aged white man's running speed was a little slower this time. After all, there were Molotov cocktails blocking the pursuers, and he didn't believe that Luo An would dare to risk being burned to death to catch him. Soon, the middle-aged white man ran to the end of the alley. When he was about to look back at the fire he had started with a smile, a shout suddenly came from behind him. "Why did you stop? Keep running." "What?" The middle-aged white man's pupils shrank, and he turned back hurriedly, only to see Luo An rushing towards him unscathed with a blazing flame background. What kind of monster is this guy? How did he get over the flames? The middle-aged white man had a look of seeing a ghost on his face, but before he could speak, Luo An had already run not far from him. Then, Luo An stomped his feet hard on the ground and rushed towards the middle-aged white man like a cannonball. The middle-aged white man's brain was working rapidly, and just as he was about to turn around to avoid it, Luo An's knee had already hit him in front of him. Bang! The knee hit his chest, and the middle-aged white man's eyes turned red instantly, and then he hit the wall behind him hard, and a mouthful of blood spurted out of his mouth. Chapter 200 Another arson. In the alley. Feeling the severe pain in his chest, and seeing the blood he had just spit out, the middle-aged white man's eyes were full of anger. He took out a pistol from behind his buttocks, and while he opened his mouth and cursed, he was ready to attack Luo An. Son of. Before the middle-aged white man finished his words, Luo An had already moved in front of him with a cold look in his eyes. Snap. Easily grabbing the other's wrist holding the pistol, Luo An twisted it hard. Snap. Ah, the sound of the bone breaking was crisp and pleasant, and the middle-aged white man's pupils suddenly shrank, and he screamed and wailed loudly in an instant. Luo An grinned and said coldly, just now it was a Molotov cocktail, and now it's a pistol. You have a lot of weapons. Fuck you. Because of the severe pain caused by the fracture, the middle-aged white man's forehead was full of beads of sweat, but he still cursed, and raised his own questions. Damn FBI. How did you get through that flame? Luo An raised his eyebrows. Of course it was the fireproof potion opened in the system treasure chest. But he didn't need to answer the other party's question, because at this moment, the middle-aged white man's other hand quickly reached for another mini pistol he had been hiding, preparing to use it to continue attacking Luo An. Luo An, who saw the other party's movements clearly, narrowed his eyes slightly, first grasped the other party's wrist with force, and used the other party's hand to throw the pistol to the ground behind the middle-aged white man. Then Luo An stepped back slightly and kicked the middle-aged white man directly with a whip kick. Darn, the middle-aged white man only felt Luo An's figure flash, and his abdomen was hit hard. His body was hunched like a lobster and hit the wall just now. Bang. The next second, a gunshot rang out, and a bullet hole appeared in the center of the middle-aged white man's forehead. His body softened and fell to the ground. On his chest, the 3 big letters of FBI were clearly written. Under such circumstances, the middle-aged white man was still preparing to send Luo An to heaven again and again. There was no choice, Luo An had to send him to hell first. Beep beep. Just as Roan was carefully checking the wallet in the other person's pocket, Mona drove and south to the road at the end of the alley, got out of the car quickly with a pistol, and walked towards Roan, her eyes full of tension and worry. Are you okay, Roan? I'm fine. Roan waved his hand, indicating that he was unharmed, and then handed the wallet he found in the pocket of the body to Mona, smiling. There are photos, credit cards and driver's license of this guy in it. Please search his identity information. No problem. After taking the wallet and seeing that Roan had no injuries on his body, Mona was relieved. After agreeing to Roan's request, she patted his arm hard, with a serious face. Roan, every time you chase the enemy alone, it's too dangerous. You must not do this next time. Roan laughed. Okay, I won't do it next time. After glaring at Roan, Mona took out her mobile phone and called the agent to come here to deal with the body. When the professional agents arrived here, Roan and Mona immediately drove the sub back to the Jacob Federal Building. In the interrogation room, the white young man in the passenger seat of the grey car sat on a chair, looking at the handcuffs on his wrists, looking around constantly, his face full of panic. The middle-aged white man is called Holland. He was imprisoned for multiple crimes such as illegal possession of multiple weapons, intentional injury, illegal possession of readings, etc., and is now on parole. The guy in front of him is called Kermit, and he is still a college student. In the monitoring room, Mona showed the other party's personal information to Roan and Lassie, and said, his experience from childhood to adulthood shows that Kermit is a good boy and has no criminal record. Now he has a felony record, and the first one is the felony of attacking FBI agents. Seeing the records in the computer data, Roan's mouth corner slightly raised, because it shows that Kermit is very timid. After Lassie prepared the notebook, Roan put away the smile on his face, took a deep breath, and kicked open the door of the interrogation room. Bang! The sudden loud noise scared Kermit's whole body and his face was full of panic. If his hands were not handcuffed, he would almost jump up from the chair. Kermit Sheffield. Seeing the other party's performance, Roan pretended to be angry and shouted, "Are you crazy? Throwing Molotov cocktails at the FBI. And then you want to run us over with your car? No. Seeing the cold light in Roan's eyes, Kermit's face turned pale, and he waved his hands repeatedly, stammering but explaining in a very anxious tone, "Our target is not your FBI, but that newspaper. And I didn't throw Molotov cocktails. It was Holland who threw them. It wasn't me who drove the car, it was Bob. He was the one who wanted to run you over and run away." Kermit was frightened by Roan and immediately confessed everything. Lassie, who was sitting on the chair, recorded what the other party said, while giving Roan a thumbs up where Kermit couldn't see. Roan raised his eyebrows with his back to Kermit, and then continued loudly, "Why? Why did you throw Molotov cocktails at that newspaper? Do you hate newspapers?" "No, I don't hate newspapers themselves." Kermit swallowed and replied, "I just hate the slogan of their organization and their behavior. Newspapers are supposed to be neutral objects for expressing one's own opinions, but they have been turned into tools for wanton insults and abuse of others by those guys who claim to be elites. Insult others wantonly?" A gleam of light flashed in Roan's eyes, and something came to his mind. He asked, "So you used Molotov cocktails to hurt them?" "Why? Just to scare them. I didn't want to hurt them." Kermit replied, "The reason is of course that group of people killed Congressman Emanuel Bain. Their political organization supports white supremacy." Roan nodded calmly, which was consistent with his previous guess, and continued to ask, "Do you think the arson case is related to that newspaper? Do you have any evidence?" "I'm actually not sure about this. This is what Holland and Bob told me." Kermit shook his head, indicating that he had just joined the political organization they both belonged to not long ago, and he didn't know the specific situation inside. He then added, "But when I first joined this organization, the base was set on fire with a Molotov cocktail, and we had to move to a new place. Someone in that newspaper claimed responsibility for it, so Emanuel Bain was most likely killed by someone in this newspaper." "Did your organization's base burn down?" Lassie frowned as she lowered her head to write. Roan continued to ask questions. "Did you call the police?" Kermit shook his head. "Because no one was injured, we didn't call the police. We only contacted the New York Fire Department. This will also make it easier for you to take revenge afterwards." Roan nodded and instantly guessed the thoughts of the leader of the political organization. After getting the address of the base that was burned down from Kermit, Roan immediately took Lassie out of the interrogation room and contacted the agents of the Trace Examination Department to search for clues at the base. That afternoon, Ryder walked into the 5th investigation team with the report of the Trace Examination Department and laughed loudly. "Good news, everyone. According to the Trace Examination Department's test of the fragments of the Molotov cocktails at the two fire scenes, they were found to be made of the same material, and the production techniques and some details are exactly the same. So the murderer behind these two cases is most likely the same person or the same group of people." End of this chapter. Thank you very much for reaching the end. Don't forget to like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription, or donation encourages us to continue. Thanks to everyone. See you in the next video.